All right, I'm going to get going, ladies and gentlemen. All right, we are going to resume our public hearing for 100 Amherst Avenue, the zoning bylaw amendment for 100 Amherst Avenue. Public hearings are a quasi-judicial setting that is set down to us from provincial law, and so we have some pretty strict regulations about some aspects of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read this into the record again as we continue tonight. It should only take me a couple minutes to go through it, and then we will head straight into public speakers after that time. This public hearing is being reconvened to receive further input from the community regarding bylaw 8778 pursuant to section 464 of the Local Government Act, and is being held in a hybrid meeting format, meaning there's a combination of in-person and electronic participation by some or all members of council or by staff and the public. The hearing is being streamed live over the internet and recorded in accordance with the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Public participation in this hearing is being accommodated by speakers having signed up in advance, as stated in the notice of public hearing, as well as observers being provided the Zoom meeting information on the DNB website and in the notice of public hearing. Written submissions will be received by the corporate officer on behalf of and shared with council at any time up to the time the hearing is closed. These may be submitted to input@dnb.org. Therefore, in this manner, all persons will be afforded a reasonable opportunity to be heard and to present written submissions. The chair has established the following rules for this public hearing. We will begin by calling on the person who is speaking at the time the hearing was adjourned last night, followed by speakers who have signed up to speak since the hearing adjourned. At the end of the speakers list, the chair may call for any other additional speakers from those in attendance in person and via Zoom. Speakers will have 5 minutes to address council for a first time and are asked to begin their remarks to council by stating their name. After everyone who wishes to speak has spoken once, speakers will then be allowed one additional 5-minute opportunity. Any additional presentations will only be allowed at the discretion of the chair. Speakers are reminded to not repeat information from their previous presentations and to ensure all comments remain focused on the bylaw under consideration this evening. If a written submission has been provided, there's no need to read it as it will have already been seen by the council, but speakers may summarize or briefly reiterate the highlights of their submission. All members of the audience are asked to be respectful of one another as diverse opinions are expressed. Council wishes to hear everyone's views in an open and impartial forum. Some important notes about public hearings. Council's here to listen to the public, not to debate the merits of the bylaw. Council may ask clarifying questions. The corporate officer has a binder containing documents and submissions related to the bylaw which council has received and which you are welcome to review. This is available on the table next to the door and online at dnb.org/agenda. Everyone at the hearing will be provided an opportunity to speak. If necessary, we will continue on a third night. At the conclusion of the public input, council may request further information from staff, which may or may not require an extension of the hearing, or council may close the hearing, after which council should not receive further new information from the public. Okay. And then the other stuff I forgot last night at the very beginning, the black tray on the table up here is where you can, if you have speakers' notes or your own submissions at the time and you put it into the black tray, we'll scan it and copy it to council so that it becomes part of their record as well. You can also email us up until the public hearing is in closure. If you have comments, we'll still be able to receive them. But once we hit that point where we've decided that the public hearing is closed, which is very possible tonight, then we're not allowed to receive further new submissions at that time. I did want to just say, you know, we've had, I think we had 31 speakers last night. We had got a good start on this. We had the applicant and presentations from both the applicant and from staff. So tonight is largely going to be focused just on additional public hearing speakers. In the most neutral way possible, I was just going to comment about the purpose of the second public hearing was really to determine whether or not the new information affected people's decisions about the whole process. You can comment about anything. You can be in favor or opposed or whatever, but something that might help council make their decision is, does the new information affect your position? And so I just would put that out there to people, that if that's something that interests you, no, it doesn't change my mind. Yes, it does change my mind. I'm more opposed. I'm more in favor. Whatever. I give that as neutral as I possibly can, but that may be something that helps council make their decision when this matter comes back to third reading at that time. Other than that, I'm not going to make any other comments as we move back in. So where we were at last time was we went, the 31st speaker was a first-time speaker, and so I'm going to resume where we left off. We did have somebody send an email in requesting to be added to the list. And so the first speaker this evening is going to be first-time speaker Andrea Brown, joining us here in person. Welcome. When you're comfortable, you have 5 minutes to address the hearing.
Good evening, Your Worship, councillors. My name is Andrea Brown, and I live in Maplewood, less than a kilometer from the Chemtrade facility. I'm here tonight to express my strong opposition to this rezoning application. I want to start by addressing a claim made during yesterday's public hearing. It was said that there was strong community support for this project. That was not what I observed at last night's hearing. At that meeting, the voice I heard that were in favor were from Chemtrade employees or individuals connected to the company and its industry partners. The majority of residents spoke against Chemtrade's application for rezoning. As others have mentioned, this rezoning application is being unfairly positioned as an all-or-nothing situation, that either this facility is approved to continue operating as proposed, or our region risks losing access to chlorine entirely. That framing feels overly simplistic and frankly unfair. It puts pressure on the community and on council to accept a high level of risk without fully exploring safer or more appropriate alternatives. As many others have said, I also understand the importance of industry. It plays a vital role in our economy, but safety must come first, especially when we are talking about hazardous materials in close proximity to high-density neighborhoods filled with homes, schools, and public spaces. At this point, I don't feel confident that the safety concerns have been adequately addressed, even with the changes. For example, the plan relies heavily on a shelter-in-place response in the event of a chlorine leak. But how would that work in practice? Would residents be notified through phone alerts, sirens? If evacuating quickly is important and people only have minutes to respond, what happens if they are not at home? If someone is out for a run or children are outside, what are they expected to do? Are we expected to constantly monitor our phones just in case? Also, as we know, the Iron Workers Memorial Bridge can easily get backed up. That being the case, how are we expected to get additional safety supports in the event of a leak if all the roads are blocked? I am also concerned about the reliance on a covenant as a long-term safeguard against this zoning bylaw, given that it could potentially be altered or removed after 2046. That does not provide lasting reassurance. Finally, we need to consider the broader context that we live in today. Climate-related emergencies are becoming more frequent. At yesterday's meeting, we heard that there are 11 firefighters on call at a time. With increasing pressure from wildfire seasons and other emergencies, it is difficult to understand how emergency services would be able to respond effectively to a chlorine leak at the same time. And again, this is especially concerning in the context of Maplewood's own long-term plan. This is an area that is actively being densified, with more housing, more families, and more people moving in. Approving this rezoning means accepting unnecessary risk at the same time as we are intentionally growing the population in this neighborhood. Those two directions are fundamentally at odds. Of course, life comes with acknowledging that we take risks. But if we can help to mitigate unnecessary risks, then why accept that thousands of lives must be put in danger just because life comes with risk? Chemtrade has stated that there are increased safety measures in place since their initial application was denied on April 13th. However, I'm wondering why these safety measures were not already proposed when they initially applied, given that a chlorine leak would be absolutely devastating. And ultimately, Council is accountable to the people of North Vancouver, the residents who live here, raise families here, and who will continue to be put at risk if this application goes through. This comes down to the safety and well-being of our community. Allowing this level of risk to continue in an increasingly densely populated residential neighborhood requires a very high standard of justification. And in my view, that standard has not been met. I'm asking you to stand with our community and make the decision that protects the people who live here, now and in the future. Please reject this rezoning application. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Andrea Brown. Okay, I believe that brings us up to date with the people who had signed up ahead of time for first-time speakers. And so now I'm going to go out to the room. Would anybody else like to address the hearing a first time? I've got two on the aisle. And the same, I'm going to go, yeah, then you, perfect, fantastic. And then I will just say I'll come to some virtual speakers next. If there are virtual participants and you want to raise your virtual hand, we'll come to you next after that. Welcome. When you're comfortable, you have 5 minutes to address the hearing. If you could start with your name for the record, I'd appreciate that.
Dave Sadler, Roche Point Drive, 4 kilometers downwind from the chlorine plant. Now, I asked AI to compile a list of chlorine plants located in urban areas around the world. Now, it came up with a list of 6, while pointing out that 5 were located in industrial zones away from populated areas. However, there was only 1 plant located in the middle of a residential area, our very own Chemtrade chlorine plant in Maplewood. Now, during this hearing, I've heard from Chemtrade's top guns and their employees attesting to the safety of the plant. But the fact remains that despite industry safety protocols, accidents do happen. Now, I'm sure Dow Chemicals' Olin chlorine plant in Freeport, Texas, have similar safety bells and whistles in place as our own chlorine plant. However, in May 2025, just 1 year ago, it leaked 10,000 pounds of chlorine gas in only 48 minutes, and a yellow cloud escaped the plant's boundaries. Thousands of people from the nearby towns of Freeport, Chute, and Lake Jackson were all placed temporarily under lockdown in towns that were located 1, 8, and 11 miles away from the plant. Now, just imagine the anxiety, turmoil, parents and school children freaking out, and the economic cost to the communities. Now think about our community, Second Narrows, roads gridlocked, a huge area under lockdown, nowhere to hide. And I know I should have had those vinyl windows installed, airtight vinyl windows installed. It's no wonder that today, all chlorine plants are now situated far from population centers. Now, to upgrade our chlorine plant to world-class risk status, we must consider the big one. Qualified seismologists expect a catastrophic 9-magnitude earthquake with a probability of 10 to 20% within the next 50 years, just like Japan's Fukushima. A smaller, shallow 6 to 7 magnitude earthquake probability increases to 30% within 50 years. 30%. Now, this is more likely and could occur without warning. Construction built on soft soil areas or fill or silt, like the North Shore waterfront, would experience amplified shaking and soil liquidation. Roads would crack, buildings, foundations sink. And I wonder how 90-ton chlorine rail cars would hold up. This is why much of the chlorine site is classified as a full destruction zone in the district's created red zones. In the last public hearing, council appeared to dismiss seismologists' prediction almost as a non-event. Should thousands of district homeowners cancel their earthquake insurance and ignore the seismologists' warnings as well? I don't think so. The chlorine plant has been operating for 69 years. We're being asked to add another 20 years to 2046, and the plant will be 89 years old. Yet the seismologists talk in terms of 50 years. I think of a ticking time bomb. So place your bets, but council should not gamble with public safety. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Sadler. Okay, next, Mr. Inman. Okay. Sorry, you were next on the aisle. Yes, come on down. Welcome. When you're comfortable, you have 5 minutes to address the hearing. If you could,
I'm
for the record. Thank you.
I'm Rob. Okay. I'm Rob Inman, multi-residential commercial property owner in North Vancouver, but I'm here dressed in my work clothes and representing 12 other people who are all still working down on by the chemical plant. Over the last few days, I was here a couple months ago and said a few things, but over the last few days, I met with 12 people who we have operate our businesses or own the property. Some lease and operate the business on Riverside West from Dalton Highway down to the train track and on Spicer, and also including Allied Shipyards. So none of us are here. What they've all told me to say, none of us are here to promote the chemical plant or for or against, but just to state the facts, is that Allied Shipyards has been operating since 1948. I've been on Riverside Drive since 1978. And every person I talk to who's either owns the company that's operating on the property or also owns the property and leases it out, not one person has any problem with chemtrade operating. We basically, no one's had any problem, and we see the rail cars come through on a regular basis. Is that Jazz Tram, for example, has over 60 people working there. Allied Shipyards over 75 people. And there's a couple other companies that have a lot of employees. Any case is that there's never has been, and there isn't any concern with having, for hook of chemicals. So we all call it the chlorine plant. Our concern is just what this young lady spoke first said, that is what to do in the event if there is a spill. And one thing that was brought up is that in the past, every third Thursday, I believe it was, is that the alarm signal would go off as a test, and shortly afterwards it would go off again saying all clear. At this point in time, the only person who can hear that, so apparently it's still happening, it was Chuck from Allied Shipyards who owns it. He says he can hear it sometimes. We can't hear it, and apparently they've turned it down. So if the siren went off, all the people who not only work in our area, but the rest of the area around will have no idea what the hell's going on. And then there's last night, there was all the information about shelter, and we've all known to get high up. So Jazz Tram is a good example. They can just go up to the third floor of their building. In my case, I would put a ladder up and get on the roof. And but anyways, but last night, and I've told them all to go online and see, from the meeting, because Mayor Mike Danks, the Fire Chief Mike Danks, that was an excellent presentation. Like we know that the number one fire hall is literally 1 minute away. So if a siren went off, the fire trucks we're going to hear them within a minute or two. And so everyone's saying the same thing. well, what to do if you hear the siren. Also, the shelter in place, or what, all the, there's nobody has time to get together and have chemtrad to come and speak to, because probably just can't get enough people. But to have information, written information out telling us what to do, and what in event of emergency. But also, we all agree is that we're fortunate to have, well, the fire department that we have, and all the training and the presentation from Chief Danks last night was excellent. So we feel very comfortable for what's happening. So that's about it. Just what to do and get the information out. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Rob Inman. Okay, again, any virtual participants that would like to speak for a first time, just raise your virtual hand. Would anybody else like, I see a person here in the room, come on up. Just so you know, there's about 30 people online as well. Last night, there was about 60 people online. So it's not just the people in the room. We do try to make sure that they feel welcome to participate as well. Welcome. When you're comfortable, you have 5 minutes to address the hearing. If you could start with your name for the record, that would be appreciated.
My name is Mike Forrest. I used to be a resident for many, many years. No longer living in the district, but I have been doing some work at the chlorine plant. Worship and council, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm a mechanical engineer by schooling, and have been engineering projects since 1980 when I moved to Canada and lived in North Vancouver. Most of my work has been involved in pulp paper projects, so I'm very familiar with the chemicals that are used in that industry as well. I resided in the district and the city of North Vancouver, and Hooker Chemicals was a fact of life. But at the time that I moved here, I didn't really understand what that meant. So when I worked there later in my career, I had a better understanding. North Van was my home for many years. I worked and played here, actively participating in amateur dramatics and the Deep Cove Stage, Presentation House, and the like. I'm hoping nobody remembers seeing me on stage, but that's another story. I worked for a large engineering company for a number of years that worked across the country, many different types of projects. And ultimately, I moved to the Sunshine Coast and became a departmental engineer at the Howe Sound Pulp facility. I executed projects, executed construction, and in 2007, I joined a company called MG Engineering, and I was introduced to Connexus Chemtrade, a site where they had been doing projects for a number of years. Excuse me. From 2010 onward, I spent a large percentage of my time on loan to Connexus Chemtrade as a project manager and a construction manager. I was and continue to be impressed by the knowledge and the commitment of the employees at the plant, operators, maintenance personnel, and management, and have had the privilege of working with them all. Chemtrade management have always put safety as a priority when executing projects. They have robust project reviews, hazard and operability studies, operability maintenance reviews, and identification of deficiencies and resolution. Also, multiple inspections of all the equipment and piping on site. So in addition to the employee safety, contractor safety is paramount. New projects are prioritized to address safety, code improvements, a number of improvements, seismic upgrades, as the codes come out every few years and they require upgrading. Now, circling back to my initial comment about not knowing what it meant to be close to Hooker Chemicals, subsequent experience working with this plant and its extremely knowledgeable and safety-conscious personnel, I now know there is a minimum risk to personnel due to the operation of this facility. I feel safer walking into this plant and area than I do driving on the roads around the facility. I believe that the plant is and has been since 1957 a pillar of the community, contributing to its growth and providing employment well beyond its direct employees and providing tax revenues to the district. In addition to the direct employees, contractors and visiting companies provide revenue to local restaurants, hotels, bed and breakfasts, and other stores. They do trust that the Mayor and Council will look favorably upon this application to ensure that Western Canada maintains production of these vital resources in the safest possible way. The community I come from, the Sunshine Coast, it was discussed yesterday about where do you get your hypo bleach from for water disinfection. Well, the community of the Sunshine Coast, the Sunshine Coast Regional District, also use hypo, and as do most municipalities. And again, hypo is something that it's not the same as liquid chlorine, absolutely. It's not as stable as liquid chlorine and will deteriorate over time. Anyway, thank you very much for this time.
Thank you very much for your comments. Mike Forrest. Would anybody else like to speak a first time? We have two. I'm going to go right. Yes, you, and then next up back there, please. All right. Welcome. When you're ready to go, you have 5 minutes to address the hearing. If you could start with your name for the record, please.
Hey, hi, Michael Gravison. I didn't plan an intro. I don't have the time. I'll probably do it later, but some people call me a subject matter expert. I don't know about that, but I'll take it. So this is the first slide for every Chemtrade presentation. Their whole campaign has been centered around these two themes: securing safe drinking water for Canadians and reducing potential risk for the community. Until the first public hearing, many people accepted this at face value. But thanks to the open process allowed for by Council and Mayor Little, claims were challenged and new facts emerged. And that's how good decisions are made, not by blindly accepting a narrative, but by testing it against the facts. Once and for all, let's look at what Chemtrade is actually doing for these two issues. They're saying that this is their purpose: securing safe drinking water. And these are their claims. They said their chlorine treats the water. Then they admitted, not true, it's bleach. On February 24th, the public hearing at 2 hours, 14 minutes, Alan Robinson said, and I quote, "There are very few municipalities left that still use chlorine. We've been very open about that. Stop confusing liquid chlorine with bleach." But then they said bleach doesn't work. Yes, it does. That's why everybody uses it, and it's safer. They admitted this too. Most of our chlorine is used in Canada, they said. Nope, it's less than 5%. Over 90% is shipped to the US. They also admitted this directionally. But there's no alternative chlorine source, so you have no choice. You're basically stuck with us. Actually, there's way too much chlorine in Canada. Chemtrade made 170,000 tons of chlorine in 2025, but the amount used in Western Canada was only 8,000 tons. The other three Canadian producers don't need to replace 170,000 tons. They're not going to ship it to BC so they can ship most of it back to the US. They would have to replace 8,000 tons. The other three exported 172,000 tons in 2025. They could replace the 8,000 tons before I get up from this 5-minute speech. If anyone still believes that Chemtrade is essential for safe drinking water, please ask more questions. I'm not saying they don't contribute, but it's only a very small part of what they do. They're not critical infrastructure. Now let's look at the proposed risk reductions for the community. But first, what are the risks? Let's be clear. All the products made at this site are dangerous, but we're only looking at chlorine. Why? Because chlorine's danger is unique. It does not need to burn or explode. If you breathe it, you're dead. And why liquid chlorine? Because a release of liquid chlorine creates a deadly expanding cloud where the death zone is 460 times bigger than the container it just escaped. But if you don't liquefy it and you use it in the process, like how Chemtrade makes hydrochloric acid right now, there's no expansion, no huge cloud, making the death zone very much smaller. All right, here are the risks. Liquid chlorine released during loading, storage, and transportation. The first one, loading. What's the current situation? They're loading the car outside. If there's a leak, you get a 10-kilometer diameter deadly chlorine cloud, which absolutely does not stop at the property line. It will go at least 5 kilometers from the origin of the leak. Proposed situation, rail cars would be loaded inside a protective building. Improvement? Absolutely. So far, so good. Storage. They say that they're removing almost all of it, leaving only about 4 tons. If this was true, I would agree that's a good thing because unfortunately, we were reminded very recently that storage accidents can happen. Oops. These happened just down the road a few weeks ago. People died. This happened in 2016. A rail car had just been escorted out of a sealed building similar to the one that's being proposed. It developed a crack, released the chlorine, multiple people injured, mass evacuations across 2 states. So you got the fixed chlorine tank below the borderline so it's on the port land, and you got the 32 full cars up top. What are they proposing? They're going to remove only the 60-ton tank, keeping the 32 full cars on site. That's not a reduction, that's a rounding error. There's absolutely no risk reduction to the community here. But then Chemtrade said in their May 15th myth-busting letter, they don't count the 32 cars. Very convenient. Well, that depends. This is from their propaganda website. What is stored in the rail cars? We have space to store. We have an average of 32 cars containing liquid chlorine on our site. Stored, store, have, arose by any other name. Give me a break. And last but not least, transportation, zero change. Oops. Zero change, zero risk reduction. Oh, but we don't have jurisdiction. Wait a minute. Did they say they would reduce the risk to the community, or did they say they didn't have jurisdiction to reduce the risk to the community? No improvement. So this is a net improvement. A 60-ton tank and 1 rail car. You got 32 rail cars there on site and 5 traveling through the community. So both things were wrong and misleading. You can't say something is your purpose if you only do it less than 5% of the time. If you can't say you're reducing the risk to the community, you can't say you're reducing the risk to the community if you continue to store and ship liquid chlorine. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Michael Graveson. Next, in the back, please. And
Yes. Can I email it, or is there a chance it's going to be closed by the time I email it?
you just need to email it by the time it's closed. But if you put it, sorry, if you've got your personal notes on it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll email it.
Probably within the next couple hours, and you'll be fine. But
Thank you.
welcome. When you're ready to go, you have 5 minutes to address the hearing.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for speaking. My name is Chris Bocock. I've spoken here before. I'm not going to repeat anything I've spoken about before, but I'm going to build on those theories. Provided all the slides in the process, and I'm going to refer to some things that have been spoken about before. Let's talk about some of the realities of liquid chlorine release, because it's very clear there are misunderstandings about the product itself. So I'm going to try to describe what a release looks like and how that's affected by the community and the response. The risk of liquid chlorine is present in the community related to the facility, but mostly due to the rail cars of liquid chlorine. It's a worst case scenario, with high fatality rates, with an alarming scale of impact, greater than 5 kilometers. It rapidly impacts the community, meaning it moves in a pressurized way. So it's rapid onset to the community. This is something that's not going to sneak up. This is going to be on the community really quickly, and it's going to be moving forward and growing fast, impacting more and more people and limiting their ability to move and escape. It's fatal at very low concentrations, which limits the effectiveness of shelter in place. In fact, staying in a place, in a building that accumulates that chlorine is going to lead to high fatality rates. And as related to emergency response, it's expected that the demands of the event will far exceed the response capability of the fire department in the District of North Vancouver, the North Shore Fire Departments, or any fire department across most of North America, excluding the very largest departments. Yet the response strategies for those departments will all be the same. The risk of chlorine, it's interesting, in a rail car, it was identified that there were 33 involved liquid rail cars in accidents, and this was shown to be proof of how safe those rail cars are. I look at it the other way. It's not evidence of rail safety. Yes, there wasn't a leak, but isn't this a warning? There were 33 independent events where deaths could have occurred at these high magnitudes. Remember, 2,000 casualties related to an event of this puts any city in the category of Bhopal, India, as far as a chemical release. Some of the biggest losses of life ever seen in industrial interface. This is a warning. And we've seen rail derailments at a rate of about one major derailment a month in BC over the last year. We've been lucky that they've been lumber or they've been coal, right? But if one of those cars is related to chlorine, we have a whole different issue. One of the issues about train speeds and design, we've heard a lot about the DOT 105, that the rail car is much safer. It is much safer than its predecessor. The top rollover protection is designed for 15 kilometers an hour, which is up from about its predecessor of 9 kilometers an hour. With the speeds of travel maxed out at 80, 65, and 40 kilometers an hour, you can see that the speed of travel of that rail car far exceeds its design. That's a problem. Related to puncture resistance, same issue. It's raised from 15 kilometers an hour to 30 kilometers an hour. But again, the design maximum speeds allowed is far exceeded by the protection provided by engineering. These are the outcomes, and they're uncontrollable related to chlorine, because as you heard from Chief Danks and his operational status as he described, his strategy is right on point. There is no ability for any department to enter, regardless of the number of people, to affect the people and the lives inside chlorine. That means those folks are on their own. And those are some staggering numbers and staggering size of impact. This is from Chemtrade's chlorine modeling themselves. This is their protocol called an integrated contingency plan. It identifies a chlorine impact zone of over 5.6 kilometers. That's a massive area. Shelter in place is ineffective related to this toxic inhalation hazard. Each individual will be required to self-evacuate themselves and will have a short time to do it. Your fire department in the District of North Van is excellent. It's especially excellent at the special operations related to technical mountain rescue and wildland firefighting. They do take the right premise in that they work in a defensive posture related to this hazard. That's exactly appropriate. The issue we have with this event is anytime you expose your first responders, police, fire, paramedics, hospital workers to this level of catastrophic mass casualty incident, you're going to expose them to inhalation hazards, cardiac stress, and injuries from overexertion and physical trauma. These will be cascaded through all the responders present and throughout the region when they're unable to respond to medical emergencies in their communities because they're all dragged down by this massive event. The last thing, I'll just close with this. The question came about the expansion of the district's fire department to increase its ability to provide rescue rates. It would take, at minimum standards of staffing, an additional 60 firefighters. When you put them each on shift, that's about 300 additional members, or an annual budget increase of $60 million, which I would say is about 60%. And it's only expected to increase the survivability inside that hazard zone by about 1%, 20 rescues per hour. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Chris Bocock. Okay, would anybody else like to address the hearing for a first time? Again, offer to virtual participants. If you raise your virtual hand, we'll try to include you in the meeting here. Yes, come on down. Welcome. When you're comfortable, you have 5 minutes to address the hearing.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and members of council. I'm quite refreshed today because for the first time I've seen some real arguments put forth by a number of people against having chlorine being shipped.
I'm going to press you to just be a little closer to the microphone, Corey.
But chlorine, yes.
Look better. Thank you.
Anyway, I sent some material, but it's for reading only, really. Just to remind council that in 2046, I'll be 104 years old. I hope I make it. I started on this issue in the 1980s when I was just 40 years old. I could not believe that this problem had not been solved decades ago, because previous councils, many of them, had said no more after 2030 or even earlier dates. I just am astounded that nothing was done. And yet there's the authority to do something. I have never seen any problems either with the plant until, of course, the unthinkable happens. That's the problem. We should not be living under a condition where these things can happen. Doesn't matter if it's with a 7-point or a 9-point earthquake. One is just worse than another. Both of them seem to be on a more rapid pace than I had anticipated. Some of these 9.1s are estimated to happen within the next 50 years. Considering our lifespan, I guess that's pretty short. And as somebody indicated, but never clearly espoused by the emergency people, that the emergency response will fall way short. You can't go into a cloud with the equipment that they have. They won't. Puts their own lives at risk. And I don't know how a few could rescue the thousands that need to come out. Windows will be shattered, no question about that. So the lower floors, people rescuing places, not a good idea. The other aspect I'm sure that is not too well known is that large earthquakes that are mentioned in studies will see the plant literally sink into the quicksand. It's all fill, mud, muck that it's based sitting on. And I must say, even the sewage plant has the same sort of problem. I'm looking at 2 towers of pizza, like Italy has. They'll be leaning and they'll go into the waters, the slush. And this is should be a wake-up call for all such things on the waterfront. Now, on the safety of the facility, we absolutely need to know what the industry says. What are their, contracts? I know of only one number, $300 million coverage insurance some decades ago. But since that time, I've raised the issue time and time again that council should find out what the real number is for the insured. Somebody on council has to ask that question of staff. We, as public, cannot put those questions and have them answered. It's not the way the things work around here. Now, for a council, no, I think I'll skip the last paragraph so I can read it more slowly. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Corey Cost. Okay. Would anybody else like to address? Yes, Kathy. Welcome. When you're comfortable, you have 5 minutes to address the hearing. If you could start with your name for the record.
Hi, my name is Kathy Bryden. I don't like public speaking, so I won't be comfortable. But wanted to say I've lived in the area for probably around 24 years. And I went at the beginning when we moved there to lots of meetings about official community plan, etc., partially meet neighbors, see the community. And I've also taken part in some of the CAP meetings that happen and enjoyed all of the companies, many of whom spoke. And I do think that Connexus at the time and now Chemtrade are great corporate citizens, good companies. But the level at the time, the outcome of everything that happened, I don't know the exact years, but it was quite a long time ago when they decided to that they were going to phase out liquid chlorine, and that was a very big decision at the time. That they were going to allow things to continue, but they were going to phase it out. I thought that was how it stood, and so now to have things come back, and also just want to point out the fact that having the onus is now on the District of North Vancouver that they're saying rezone land. This isn't a matter of keeping the status quo. This is the matter of taking a piece of land that's currently not zoned for that and inviting us to decide that we're going to begin putting liquid chlorine on that. And I just don't think that's the right decision. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Kathy Bryden. Anybody else like to address the hearing for a first time? Again, checking in with virtual participants. Okay, so we are going to go on to second time speakers now, unless you'd like to do questions. Jan, you've had some questions come in. Would you prefer to do that? Are you ready to do that right now?
Yes, Your Worship, I'm ready to provide the information, the responses we have. I think I do have one additional question, but I'll answer as much questions as possible, if that's okay.
Okay. If you could read the questions into the record and then provide your response, please.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Staff would like to open just to provide some supplemental information, clarification points to answers we already provided last night. There was a question regarding the estimated cost of hazardous material response equipment, and I believe staff did state that we can do an estimate, but this is only related to the equipment and not accounting for all the other full cost. But then the fire department did come back and say that the estimated cost for the equipment is approximately $500,000 per hazardous material response equipment unit. So that is the additional information fire department would like to provide. A question was asked about that, the safety improvement reference in Chemtrade's presentation, and specifically whether the reduction in potential risk could be quantified. And staff yesterday already provided a high-level response, and then the applicant has then come back with a further technical response, and then that is the updated QRA reflects a improvement by a factor of 10 compared with the 2006 QRA. So this is the applicant described this. This is a Dr. Thomas from Baker Risk described this as an equivalent to 90% reduction in risk at Spicer Road and Chemtrade Avenue. A further question was asked regarding whether drinking water system in BC uses bleach or chlorine, and that was a question to the BC WWA, the BC Water and Waste Association. So the association did come back with their response. And what they've said is that the current drinking water treatment practices generally use one of the two active disinfecting components: chlorine gas, which is pressurized and stored and sold as a liquid, or sodium hypochlorite solution, which is the active ingredient in bleach and is sometimes referred to as hypo. And BC WWA also advised that water treatment systems are typically designed from the get-go to use one of the two treatment methods. And conversion or converting a system from chlorine gas to sodium hypochlorite or vice versa is not a simple substitution and could require significant capital improvement. So the first question that we haven't answered from last night is that Chemtrade is 500 meters from homes in Maplewood. Are there any other chlorine gas plants in Canada that close to so many homes? That's a question. And staff did provide a response to this exact question from the last public hearing, which is that our third-party consultant has reviewed publicly available information on comparable chloride-alkali facilities in Canada and United States. The available information indicates that the distance between chlorine-producing facilities and the nearest residential area differ. And the following facilities were identified by the consultant as within the 500 meters to residential areas. And that is Urquhart Valley Field, Quebec, has a residential area distance approximately 150 meters south of the facility boundary. And Urquhart Buckingham Gatineau, Quebec, has a residential area approximately 400 meters east, separated by the Deux-Rivières River. And the next question
Can
is...
Can I just ask, please, for a follow-up there?
Okay, it was a pretty clear response to a clear question. What's the follow-up?
I'm asking staff if that information can be double-checked, because I did my own research and I found that the information that staff had provided about similar chlorine gas plants, similar to Chemtrade, were not within 150 meters. That actually was quite incorrect. And I'm wondering, can staff please go back and confirm those details?
So again, I just want to dial down into it. So of chlor-alkali plants, I think this is probably accurate information, but I think what you're trying to get at is ones that produce liquid chlorine.
Chlorine gas.
Different list of not very many chlor-alkali plants also produce liquid chlorine. I think that's what you're getting at.
I think so.
So do we know if either of those two facilities produce liquid chlorine? Perhaps the applicant could answer that pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'm going to confirm that with our consultant and get back to the mayor and council.
Does the applicant have that information on hand for those two listed chlor-alkali plants? Do they produce liquid chlorine?
They do not.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That covered? Okay. Yan Zhang, your next question and response, please.
The next question is, does Chemtrade use the tank cars, which is DOT 105 H600W tank cars as referenced by this one speaker, Henry Ward, from last night's public hearing? So the applicant has confirmed, I got this response from the applicant, confirmed that Chemtrade leases a fleet of more than 200 liquid chlorine rail cars, which are currently compliant with applicable regulations. The applicant stated that the next generation rail cars, including the cars referenced by Heron Ward, will be required by the end of 2027. The applicant further stated that the approximately 83% of its current fleet is already next generation rail cars, and the upgraded cars are continuing to arrive. The stated intent is that 100% of its fleet to be next generation rail cars by early 2027. The next question is for the Baker Risk QRA. What were the limitations or parameters within which you were asked within to conduct your QRA, and what was included and not included? And again, this response was provided by the applicant. The Baker Risk was tasked with completing a facility QRA that includes the overall plant operations and then the rail yard. The applicant advised that this approach is consistent with the 2006 QRA, and that inclusion of the rail yard is outside the standard practice. The applicant further stated that the off-site transportation was outside the scope of the QRA because transportation is under the Transport Canada jurisdiction. The next question, would the Metro Vancouver's drinking water be at risk if Chemtrade closed in 2030? So this is, I'm going to provide the response in two parts. Or staff did reach out directly to Metro Van, and they offer the following statement, which I'm happy to read into the record. And then the applicant would also like to address this issue from their perspective. Metro Vancouver ensures more than 3 million residents receives high-quality drinking water every day and treats drinking water in two stages. First, it is treated at one of Metro Vancouver's two water treatment facilities, and then it is given secondary additional secondary treatment as it travels through the region. Chlorine is a component of sodium hypochlorite, which Metro Vancouver uses for both primary and secondary disinfection during the drinking water treatment process. Metro Vancouver has a contract with Brentech Canada Inc., a large multinational company that supplies the organization with sodium hypochlorite. Chemtrade does not directly supply Metro Vancouver with chlorine. Thank you. Metro Vancouver acknowledges that there is a possibility of a supply chain risks associated with the chemical procurement and mitigates this risk through strategic contracting with suppliers such as Brentech, who demonstrates strong supply chain management practices. Chemtrade is one of Brentech's suppliers, and our understanding is that they have other suppliers that they can work with if Chemtrade is no longer operating. However, Brentech is best positioned to speak in detail about the sourcing of raw materials and the associated supply chain. Metro Vancouver is confident they will continue to be able to supply the region with high-quality drinking water well into the future. Would you like to address the issue as well, applicant?
Just because it's your first time speaking today, if you could start with your name for the record, please.
Alan Robinson, I'm the group vice president for Chemtrade. So I was going to start actually, and this may be bad, it's more of a question than anything because you're asking a hypothetical question that's going to require me to speculate. And I'm comfortable to do that with my own personal opinion and lay out some facts. But I just wanted to state that up front if the council would like me to still give you my opinion.
I'm comfortable with it, but let's stay pretty tight and narrow to the question, which is about Metro Vancouver's supply sources.
Yes, well, that in itself makes it a difficult question to answer because when we do close our facility, then you'll see responses on how much capacity we actually have, right? You're going to cause a gap of chlorine capabilities across the west coast of the US and Canada. Right. So to pinpoint one municipality and say, are they going to be able to get chlorine for bleach is a very difficult answer because what's going to happen is all municipalities or a lot of municipalities will start making the phone call for bleach or chlorine, et cetera. So what I would know if I stated the facts, right, is I've got a 228,000 ton facility that goes away. I do know that with even a competition in the room, they're expanding capacity of bleach. They've made that announcement. It's very public, but that's a fraction of the size of our plant. That means there's still a pretty large gap. That fraction roughly is about 40%. So there's still a 60% gap of how much material moves around that everyone's going to have to backfill. All right. What you heard yesterday is customers have made phone calls to local facilities in Canada asking for caustic soda. I think it's been stated here that caustic soda is pretty profitable. And the answer was that supplier didn't have the capacity. If it's profitable, why wouldn't they have the capacity? And in order to get that product, they would have to make chlorine. So do they have the chlorine capacity? I wouldn't know. I can't call them legally to ask that question, but other customers have tried. And so what that leaves you with is you've got an Eastern Canada facility, which I think Mr. Grayson has mentioned previously. They exported about 90,000 tons. I think he just said that number went up today. But anyways, what I would say is they also export tremendous amount of material to the Northeast. They would have to move that all the way across Canada to here. Is it a possibility? Absolutely, it's a possibility. They'll have to get more rail cars. The freight cost itself is double the price of the product. And so it could potentially backfill what that one municipality needs, but you're going to have a much bigger need than just one municipality. That's
Just to restate, would Metro Vancouver drinking water be at risk if chemtrade closed? And your response is it would create a shortage in the bleach market that the market would have to respond to.
The market was going to have to respond to it. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Opposing view.
Your time. This is the applicant. They have a bit of a different status. You will have an opportunity to speak a second time. Mr. Graveson, can I put your name down as a second time speaker?
Well, I
Happy
have
to.
an opposing view too.
It's not about
I
your
want to
views,
call a
it's
point of order,
clarifying-
please.
It's a clarifying question. And I read out exactly what your question was.
Yes, but it is not appropriate to have the applicant respond to a question that was posed to Metro Vancouver that this applicant even stated he has no specific knowledge of. So why would we have him respond to that question?
The question goes to staff. If staff don't feel they have adequate capability in the spot to answer, they can refer the question to the applicant if they have other specialized information. Applicant is certainly capable to answer your question. Would Metro Vancouver's drinking water be a risk if chemtrade closed? And I think we heard their response. So
we did, but I don't think it's appropriate in this context.
Okay.
This is an applicant who is asking to continue business with us, and part of that business is selling their.
This is our normal order of doing things. We do our best to respond with staff's responses. And if they need additional information, they have at their beck and call our own resources and the resources of the applicant. Happy to say that this was a response from chemtrade. This wasn't a response from Metro Vancouver or our staff. We didn't have those resources available to us on demand to be able to answer that. But I don't think it's a controversial response. The response is, there would be a shortage and it would have to be replaced in the marketplace.
And Metro Vancouver has said there would not be a shortage and they would access other supply chains. So that makes sense to me that Metro Vancouver would know what their needs are.
Testifying here, we're trying to hear the responses to the council's questions. So I'm going to carry on to the next question. And if you have a differently worded clarifying question at the end, I'll come to that question as well. But at this point, we've had a response to the question that was presented. Thank you. You're welcome to have a seat. Yan Zhang, we have another question. Do you have, if you could read the question into the record and provide your response, please.
The next question is to the applicant. Was it common knowledge among all employees of chemtrade especially those who have been recently hired in the last few years, that the future of the plant was uncertain? Or was it something that they have learned based on this rezoning application? The applicant provided the following statements. That Chemtrade has spoken openly with the employee about the need to rezone, and that this has been a point of conversation with the employees for some time. The applicant also stated that the rezoning application has heightened employee awareness. The next question, please clarify the claim that Chemtrade is responsible for 40% of the production capacity in Canada. What does that mean exactly? How much chlorine, in bracket, not derivatives, is used to treat water in BC and Canada? How much comes from Chemtrade? Again, this is a statement from the applicant that they clarify that 40% statement refers to Chemtrade's share of available liquid chlorine production capacity in Canada. The applicant states that Chemtrade is one of the 4 facilities in Canada that produce and ship liquid chlorine, and that is production represents over 40% of available liquid chlorine capacity in Canada. Chemtrade does not sell liquid chlorine directly to Canadian municipalities for drinking water treatment. Rather, Chemtrade's liquid chlorine is used as a feedstock to manufacture chlorine derivatives, including sodium hypochlorite and bleach, which are used by municipality for drinking water treatment. They further stated that 70% of the sodium hypochlorite used for water treatment in BC and Alberta uses Chemtrade chlorine as a feedstock. Can we get a response on the alarm testing every Thursday and how this works, and if it has changed at all? And I'm going to ask the applicant to respond to this directly. Please.
Mr. Hetherington.
Mayor, Council, Blair Hetherington. We have control of the alarm. We can adjust the volume up and down. Being that it was a sound nuisance, we had turned it down, but in the event of an emergency, it would be turned back up to full volume, which would broadcast quite a ways. And if it was requested that we turn it back up, that's no problem at all.
Still on the date, as the question says, testing every Thursday, or is it every 3rd Thursday of the month?
Every 3rd Thursday of the month.
3rd Thursday, as Mr. Inman said. And great, that I think addresses all of the.
Thank you.
Next question, please, Yan Zhang.
Will the rail storage be limited to 32 rail cars total, or is it an average of 32 loaded rail cars? What recourse does the community have if Chemtrade are found to be storing more than 32 partial or fully loaded rail cars? So I will let the applicant provide their response as well, but I will just preface that to state that the existing covenant on title does restrict the on-site storage capacity, including an annual daily average of 32 loaded chlorine rail cars. And moving forward, staff would expect that the new covenant, should council moves forward with further bylaw readings of this application, will continue to restrict storage capacities on site, and along with all the other conditions that were discussed openly, such as the time limit and then the additional safety reviews. So with that, I'm wondering if the applicant could provide a response.
We have Alvin Lowe online.
Alvin Lowe, virtual speaker.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm in mute.
Alvin Lowe, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you clearly. Did you hear the question that you're going to be responding to?
Yes, I did. I'm Alvin Lowe. I'm the site director at the North Vancouver facility here. And when it comes down to the 32 rail cars, we're like Yan has mentioned, we have a current restricted covenant that allows us to have up to 32 cars on site. And I guess there was a recourse question in regards to that. If there was any recourse, it would be, if we went over that, it'd be I guess the council, the district can actually come after, like sue us for it. But we would stay within the covenant. We would have to be running below the 32 cars at all times.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, next question.
What information do we have on the issue of whether modern rail cars are capable of safety derailing at a speed such as 80 kilometers per hour? Are these speed limits? Are there speed limits for rail cars carrying chlorine? And I believe the applicant said that they have some rail car specialists online to be able to provide an answer. And I'm hoping that person will provide their names so they can be
I see a
promoted.
virtual hand for William Schoonover. Okay, we're going to move William over. William, you're still marked as muted in the Zoom system. Okay, there we go. There you go. Should be able to hear you now. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
And I can hear you clearly. Did you hear the question that you're going to be responding to?
Can you repeat the question, Your Worship? Thank you.
We can have that repeated. Yansang?
Yes, so basically what information do we have on the issue of whether modern rail cars are capable of safely derailing at speed such as 80 kilometers per hour? Are there speed limits for rail cars carrying chlorine?
Yes, thank you for the question. So we have conducted, both the United States and Transport Canada conducted significant research that provided information that the closing speed of cars, that is the speed at which the initial cars will strike each other in an accident, is roughly half the speed of a derailment of the train speed. And that's due to frictional loss in the train. So as soon as the train derails, there's a tremendous amount of friction that's lost. And so the striking speed is roughly half the speed. So at an 80-kilometer train speed, you would expect the initial cars to strike each other at 40 kilometers an hour. So the 50 mile an hour speed limit outside of a CMA and 30 in the US and 35 miles, I believe in Canada, is designed to enable those cars to survive the derailment.
Thank you for your response.
Thank you. The next question is
Can we
also...
just double check? There was a second portion of the question, which was, are there speed limits for rail cars carrying chlorine? And to be clear, there are not special speed limits for rail cars carrying chlorine. There's just the normal rail speed limits in Canada. Is that a fair assessment? Do we have to go back to William for that? William's got his hand up. There you go. Please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I believe Mr. Rader's testimony last night addressed that as well, that there are specific speed limits for trains containing TIH shipments. They were put in place at the same time high hazard flammable trains were put in place back in 2016, I believe, that have speed limits for TIH trains in urban areas.
Can you refresh, what is a TIH designation?
I'm sorry, chlorine trains, trains that carry toxic inhalation hazard materials. I'm sorry, Your Worship.
Thank you. That's toxic inhalation. Okay, there you go. Yansang?
Okay, I have the next two questions that are probably best answered by the applicant as well. Is that what is the industry standard insurance policy? And then the second question I am going to ask you as well, which is about, just give me a second, is that can you provide the electricity rates that were charged to Chemtrade since 2010? I'm hoping the applicant can provide the answers to those two questions.
Sorry, I was getting a response on the first question, so I missed the second. But the first question on the insurance side, we will get you an answer in writing tomorrow, as soon as possible. I know we answered an insurance question, but I don't have it top of mind on me right now. What was the second question?
The electricity rate, your BC Hydro rate.
This
Since
stage
20
two industrial rates about 14.2 cents per kilowatt hour. Because I dog the BC Hydro board about the rates all the time.
I was gonna say, I'm not in a position to respond to that, so I'm not gonna make up a number. I don't know if Alvin Lowe, who is the site director, has a number, but we can also respond with that information.
Okay, so it sounds like we will gather those information, which is publicly available information soon. And then I do have one last question, which is why so far, which is why would we not see clarification from those who are using products and how they have mitigated shortage concerns versus those who are supplying the products? And how many tons of chlorine for treatment of water that the Chemtrade supplies does this 40% represent? And if the plant ceases, who are the producers in Canada that could make up this shortfall? And will it be difficult for them to make up this gap? And so I think most of this question should be answered by the applicant. And I will just preface this to say that staff are being asked to evaluate a rezoning application that is submitted by an applicant. We're bound to evaluate this application. And normally in the course of that, the information flow is between staff and the applicant. And during this normal course of review, we have to trust that the applicant is providing accurate information. And it's for this particular application, we have reached out to outside sources to verify those information. So with that, I will just pass it on to the applicant.
So I'm gonna, that's my question, actually.
Yeah, can we just address it one segment at a time? And some of it I think they can answer on the spot, but I think there's some that will be a challenge for the applicant to answer. But
So I would like the question about what does the 40% represent in regards to tonnage? And I'm happy to have the applicant respond to that. But as far as the other questions, I do agree with Councillor Pope that it is a bit of a conflict. I'm interested in staff providing information that will be part of the public record. I'm able to ask this question into the public record. That information we are able to secure that information if the hearing is closed.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Well, we can decide as a council at the end of the hearing whether or not that information is necessary for us to, whether it's necessary for us to continue the hearing and wait for a response,
and keep
or
it
whether
open.
we're going to close it, anticipating that there will be a response before we come back to third reading. It's actually a choice by the council.
Yeah, so I think it's a really, really important question to answer, but I don't believe it is appropriate to ask the applicant to answer that question. I think we have to search that information for ourselves and find that independently, what other producers in Canada could supply this amount. What is this actual amount? Because there's all of these percentages, and I like real numbers, not percentages.
And we can get back to the specific question that we can
the
answer.
tonnage.
So let's start with the tonnage. Do you have, I know you have presented what tonnage of chlorine goes to Canadian producers, or at least if I recall from the first hearing, your response was that might be a competitive thing that you didn't want to share, but have you shared what the tonnage of chlorine that is sold to the Canadian market?
Or water treatment.
Or water treatment, or its derivatives for water treatment, or just solely direct to water treatment?
Well, the big
previous
issue is
answer
the
was
safety and security of water in this country, and this seems to be the biggest. The
answer was that they're not direct selling liquid chlorine for water treatment. It is all to the precursor as a feedstock, I believe is what they said, to produce chlorine bleach.
Okay, my question is, Mayor Little, and I think you're making it very confusing.
No, I'm just trying to get down to.
I know I'm trying to answer you, but you're throwing a whole bunch of things out, and I just want to understand what 40% represents.
Do you have a tonnage number that leads into your 40%?
We're talking about water treatment. There's going to be a huge gap if Chemtrade closes. for water treatment, what does 40% represent?
So I think I understand, well, Alan Robinson, I think I understand the question that you're trying to ask. It's not the 40% question, because the 40% question is a capacity question. That's 228,000 tons. That's not the question I think you're trying to ask. I think what you're trying to ask is, when we say 70%, how much does that represent?
Why don't you throw out that number and we'll see if that's the answer I'm looking for.
Tons.
Okay, thank you.
So there you go. Thank you. Liquid chlorine goes into the precursor materials for drinking water treatment in Canada.
And you're exporting how many tons?
We export about 90,000+ tons of that material. So as we mentioned yesterday, we're very much an export from a chlorine standpoint, just like your oil industry, your grain industry, your seafood industry, your.
I haven't heard 90,000 tons yet.
Yep. So, but much like many industries in Canada, rely on export.
Thank you. Okay. Councillor Murray, just want to check back in with you. It seemed to me like the question had 3 parts. They've clearly addressed one of the 3 parts. You're wanting to refer the other 2 parts to a future response from our staff or someone identified by our staff. So this would be, why would we not seek clarification from those who are using products and how they have mitigated shortage concerns versus those that are supplying products? We didn't ask them to respond to that. And part 2, if the plant ceases, who are the producers in Canada that could make up this shortfall?
Yes.
I think the applicant probably could answer that credibly for us, but you'd prefer to have a different source for that.
Yeah.
No, can we get a response to that question from a neutral party?
Yeah, we can ask our consultant, but it will likely require some time for staff to actually get those information.
Thank you very much.
And Mayor Little, I would just like to say the first part of my question is because I don't think it's appropriate for the applicant to answer a question that was specifically asked to the regional district, Metro Vancouver, and they did respond in regards to their ability to mitigate any shortfall in their supply chain.
I've agreed, and we're referring it to staff to get a neutral response.
Yeah, I just did want to pipe up and support Councillor Pope because I did think that was inappropriate.
We do the best we can with the information available to us. We can't always wait to have a very specific expert. And we also have to judge whether it's necessary to make the decision under consideration for us.
I understand. I just believe that the information needs to be extremely accurate. And there's a lot of numbers that are being talked about, and it is very confusing. And I think it's part of the challenge of this hearing.
I want to cycle back to the last question that was asked to make sure that Councillor Forbes is satisfied with the response. What is the industry standard insurance and policy? Was the response what you were looking for to that question? They're going to come with additional information tomorrow. Okay. Next question, please, Yansang.
The last question we have so far is what is the rate Chemtrade pays per kilowatt hour for electricity? How many kilowatt hours do they consume per year? And how does that compare with BC residents pay per kilowatt hour for our own homes? To what extent are residents subsidizing Chemtrade's cost of electricity?
I think we said we'll come back tomorrow with that information.
They'll send a response with that additional information. Okay. Next question, please, Yansang.
That reached the end of the questions from Mayor and Council.
Just want to confirm there was a question sent that said what Metro. Oh, we already addressed that. Okay. Out of order is the applicant responded. Okay, good. Okay, thank you. All right. So I'm now going to open the floor back up to second-time speakers as well as first-time speakers. Would anybody else like to address the hearing? Well, before I go to the list, I do have a number of people who have expressed an interest to speak a second time, and they are Peter Teven, Michelle Sheardown, Robin Kinsley, Heather Druge, I'm sorry, Druge, I've said it wrong twice. Corey Cost and Michael Graveson. All of them have indicated at some point that they wanted to speak a second time, and we will add Lori Parkinson to that list as well. So at this point, I'm going to call on Peter Teven as a second time speaker and then Dave Sadler after that.
I don't fit in those chairs. I wasn't expecting to be called so soon. Ah, yeah, I had physio today. I don't have a happy knee. If I could have the overhead projector on, please. Okay. Just really briefly want to show this news story here. And I sent it in to input@dnv.org, and I asked that it be printed out and added to the public record. What I want to talk about right now, Council, again, for the record, Peter Tevan, 1900 Block, Indian River Crescent. I'm here speaking on my own behalf and not on behalf of any organization that I volunteer for. I'm also with the other residents last night who say that no one arranged for me to be here. I'm here of my own volition, and you all know I've been active on the chemtrade chlorine file for many years. Okay, I'd like to talk about the rail cars and rail shipping. And the first point of that news story that I just showed is that what I didn't know at the first public hearing was that the exact situation that I described, which was a train collision at one of the uncontrolled rail crossings with heavy commercial traffic at both Mountain Highway and Riverside, actually occurred in 2024 at Mountain Highway and the rail spur crossing. There was, and I was told at the first public hearing that, oh, don't worry, the trains are rolling very slowly. And guess what? It was a slow moving train. It had chlorine rail cars and it didn't stop and it hit a truck. Now, it may have been the truck's fault. My concern is there is a big chemical distributor down that road, down on the waterfront. I don't know what flammable materials they have, but they have huge trucks. And I'm concerned about that danger. Now, I want to just remind you that the text of the motion here includes the words manufacturing, storage, and shipping of liquid chlorine. Back on March 19th, 2007, the Council of the Day passed the following motion, which was a communique to the Port Authority. Quote, the Council of the District of North Vancouver does not support the continuing operation of the Connexus plant on the current site, regardless of any technology employed. The Council for the District of North Vancouver does not support any extension to the current VPA lease, and should the technology conversion project proceed, Council requests the VPA ensure the following aspects are addressed. And one of the following points of that was that there be an evaluation of rail safety and also measures to improve rail safety. So clearly the Council in 2007 was the opinion that they had the ability to consider and discern the question of rail cars and the risks associated with transporting them through our district. Now, I've heard multiple times over the last few months that there is an opinion that, on the part of many members of Council that council is either discouraged or even maybe even restricted from looking at the risks of 80 metric ton rail cars full of deadly liquid chlorine, both being stored at the site and transited through our district, crossing multiple uncontrolled rail crossings, and several of those that I highlighted with heavy commercial trucking traffic. That argument made no sense to me, and I'll tell you why. Because if it were true that you can't consider any land use, anything off the property in question, then why, when you're talking about a residential tower, would you ever ask for a shadow study? The shadows are off the property. Why would you ever ask for a traffic impact assessment? The traffic on Mount Seymour Parkway is off the Anthem property, for example. The argument that you can't consider the rail cars makes no sense. But the good news is I have a friend. And that friend is Mr. King, Bruce Halsord, King's Counsel. And he's the managing partner of Crease Harmon LLP in Victoria, which is BC's oldest law firm. Among his practice areas are real estate and municipal law. So I asked Mr. Halsord for his legal opinion on the matter. And I submit that to you here. Okay, and I'm leaving it in the black tray. It is professionally prepared. It is 5 pages long, and it is submitted to here for your consideration. I'm going to quote his closing paragraph. Quote, this is Mr. Halsord, King's Counsel speaking. While you cannot directly regulate interprovincial rail transit, you are legally entitled to consider the safety impacts of such transport and as a relevant land use planning factor. And the district would be entirely within its jurisdiction to restrict and prohibit, I'm almost done, to restrict and prohibit the manufacture, processing, storage, and distribution of liquid chlorine with consideration to the hazard created by railway transportation of this substance. Council, no one expects you to assert control over a federally regulated corridor, but let me add, you don't need a jurisdiction over a rail car that never leaves. I'll leave this. Would the clerk's office prefer that she protect her to keep it together?
Sounds great. Very much for your comments, Peter Teven. The next speaker I have was Michelle Sheardown. And I don't see Michelle in the audience today, and that request was immediately after she spoke yesterday. So, and I don't see a virtual participant that matches that name. I'm going to move on to the next second time speaker, which was James Rader. James Rader also expressed an interest in last night's meeting to speak a second time, and we do have a virtual participant of that name. So we're going to move James Rader over as a panelist.
Thank you and good evening, Your Worship and members of council. I provided information last night, my testimony and some slide deck. I would just like to continue where I left off last night. Yesterday's presentation was about the inspection requirements generally out beyond the fence. So this is the railroad operating side. Today, I would like to continue my discussion about what happens outside the fence on the railroad and discuss rail routing requirements and rail security requirements. I know these were some of the questions that were asked by some of the presenters and people on board. First of all, on the rail routing side, Transport Canada has rail routing requirements. It requires railway carriers to gather safety and security information from municipal, local, and tribal authorities. The requirements in place require the railroads to collect 28 different factors. Those 28 different factors have to do with population densities, tonnage, number of cars that are transporting, but it also includes geohazards. So the railroads have to consider geohazards that would affect the train along the route. Based on this analysis, the railroads have to select the safest route. There's also a requirement for the railroads to consider alternative routes and they have to choose the route alternative or the other route that has the safest means. The rail routing requirements also require the railroads to conduct security audits, car track inspections, yard surveillance, and speed restrictions are also required on these routes. For high-threat urban areas or CMAs, metropolitan areas, customers share a responsibility with the rail carrier for maintaining positive control of incoming rail cars during physical custody transfer. This is basically a handoff requirement. So railroads just cannot drop a car off at a chemical plant. The chemical plants just can't push it off to the railroad. There has to be a handshake between the two for these type of materials that are toxic by inhalation. The other thing I wanted to discuss was security plans, because I know there was some questions regarding what type of security measures are in place. Well, again, Transport Canada has requirements for not only the railroads, but also the shipping community. And those plans have been in place since about 2019. And they require railway carriers that possess dangerous goods and handling sites that load or unload dangerous goods to develop security plans. And before movement from a handling site and during transportation, railway carriers must conduct a visual inspection of each rail car containing dangerous goods for signs of tampering and suspicious items. If the railroad discovers signs of tampering or suspicious items, they're not allowed to move the car. They have to resolve the situation before movement. And lastly, I'd just like to make a response, and this was somewhat discussed yesterday by the fire department. Transport Canada also has a requirement for certain materials, and chlorine would be one of them, for the manufacturer or the chemical plant, Chemtrade in this case, to develop an emergency response assistance plan. That's an ERAP. So emergency response assistance plans basically specify certain types and quantities of dangerous goods that you have to develop the plan, submit it to Transport Canada for approval. And so Canada is the one who approves these plans that the chemical companies put in place. They detail the shipper's capabilities and procedures for responding to incidents, including specialized response personnel, equipment, and actions. The ERPs may be used along with emergency response plans from other organizations such as carrier, local, and provincial authorities, and they're tailored to specific dangerous goods, mode of transport, means of containment, and geographical areas of transport. I just wanted to bring these up because I didn't want people to think that there was a vacuum with respect to security requirements and routing requirements by railroads. And I would just like to close that as a former government employee, I worked for the Federal Railroad Administration, Washington, D.C. for a number of years. I understand the importance of obtaining public comments to support decision-making. I'm hopeful that the comments received during this hearing will help the council weigh the risks of producing chlorine on-site versus not producing chlorine on-site. And both options have risks. And I'm hopeful that the comments you receive, you'll be able to make an informative decision. So I have. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for your comments, James Rader. Next speaker I have is Robin Kinsley. And that was a request by email today, so I'm just looking for.
I'm here. Yeah.
Excellent. Welcome. You have 5 minutes to address the hearing.
Okay, and I'll first apologize. Last night, I later realized I forgot to share the slides I was referring to. However, before the meeting started, I submitted all of my slides with a written testimony. Let me share my slides. There we go. Okay, so for the record again, my name is Robin Kinsley with the Chlorine Institute. And last night, ChlorUp was mentioned several times last night. So tonight I just want to go into a little more detail about how ChlorUp actually operates. So ChlorUp is a key feature of CI Safety Stewardship Program because our membership requires all members that ship chlorine to provide a ChlorUp response team. And all of our efforts are collectively targeted to prevent mission chemical releases, but in the rare event an incident occurs, we provide a safety net that minimizes the impacts of a release. CLORUP is a gold standard industry emergency response mutual aid network and works so successfully in part to how CI organizes the response network through the various sectors in North America, which does each is designated a primary team to initiate the emergency call, as well as additional secondary support teams, and through the standard activation protocol through the emergency response call centers. The majority of CLORUP activations are funneled through Chemtrec, which is based in the US, but also accepts international calls. How this activation works is Chemtrec receives an emergency call involving a chlorine package. The phone number to call Chemtrec is easy to find. It's typically applied to the chlorine package or included in the shipping papers. The Chemtrec dispatcher immediately calls the designated primary CLORUP team in the sector where the event is occurring. This is the first call made even before notifying the shipper. The primary CLORUP team leader will immediately call the on-site contact to collect additional details about the chlorine incident and determine the appropriate response needs. Handytech operates in a different fashion, but can still connect the emergency caller to the appropriate CLORUP team. The Chlorine Institute continually provides both call centers with up-to-date contact information for all CLORUP teams and contractors. When a primary CLORUP team leader receives a call, When a primary CLORUP team receives a call, they proceed with determining response needs. No matter what, the team leader provides a technical advice by phone and determines if the on-site responders are capable of mitigating the chlorine release. If the team leader determines on-site assistance is needed, they can determine, can the primary team dispatch for effective assistance in the timeliest manner, or is there a secondary CLORUP team closer to the site that can provide the needed assistance? Or is the emergency of a condition that requires assistance from a CLORUP contractor? Finally, if the release was mitigated by on-site responders, does a CLORUP team need to be dispatched to retrieve the chlorine container for product disposal? To give you an idea of how often CLORUP activations occur, particularly as they relate to responding to chlorine tank cars, here's some data. In the chart, the blue bar is the total number of CLORUP calls per year over the last 6 years.
Rob, I'm just going to stop you a sec. I might have accidentally dropped your slide off the screen. So if you can just reload the slide, I should stay away from pressing buttons while someone's presenting things here.
There we go.
Thank you.
Okay, so here's some data on how often CLORUP activations occur. The blue bar is the total number of CLORUP calls per year for the last 6 years. It averages out to about 20 calls per year. The red bar is the total number of calls involving a chlorine tank car, which is 30% of those tank car calls. The green is the total number of calls involving a chlorine leak, which is 21% of the tank car calls. The purple is the number of times a CLORUP team needed to dispatch to the site to either mitigate the release or pick up the container, which is 7% of the tank car calls. To put these numbers into perspective, there were just over 18,000 loaded chlorine railcar shipments in North America in 2024, and 99.9944% of those shipments reached their destination without a release. The most amount of chlorine released in a single event during this 6-year period shown here was 0.024 pounds of gas.
Yeah.
This slide gives you an idea of where these emergency calls are coming from. You'll see that over this 6-year period, only one chlorine railcar emergency call activated CLORUP in Canada's Sector F, which did not involve a leak. In the 60s, after chlorine container valves had been standardized, CI developed emergency kits that can mitigate chlorine leaks from any chlorine container. All CLORUP teams and contractors own these kits, as does many first responder departments and hazmat teams. Applying these kits are the hands-on focus when CI conducts first responder training. More complex and significant chlorine railcar incidents, CI designed and tested the chlorine liquid transfer pump. Sometimes a derailed railcar cannot be moved while still containing products, so a field transfer to another railcar is required. This pump has reduced what used to take multiple weeks to complete down to a matter of days. The last major chlorine derailment was in 2005, so industry has not needed the use of this pump since it was tested. Regardless, it is regularly maintained by and stored at CLORUP Level 3 contractor's facility. It is available to any CI member experiencing a chlorine rail emergency, but it must be operated by an expertly trained CLORUP Level 3 contractor. CLORUP team members and contractors are trained on the use of this pump during CI's chlorine training events. So in summary, CI's Chlorine Safety Stewardship Program is committed to preventing releases, but also providing a safety net through CLORUP in the rare event a chlorine emergency occurs. CLORUP activation is a standardized protocol to ensure the timeliest response to chlorine emergencies, whether a leak is involved or not. The chlorine industry has designed our own specialty emergency response equipment and trains industry and first responders on that equipment to ensure the most effective and timeliest response to a chlorine incident. And data shows that nearly all chlorine railcar shipments make it to their destination without a leak. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Robin Kinsley. The next speaker is Heather Druge, joining us here in person. Welcome. When you're comfortable, you have an additional 5 minutes to address the hearing.
Okay, what's that? Me? Oh. Okay, Mayor and Council, my name is Heather Druge. I just want to put this I'm going to go into a different space here. So we're going to talk a little bit about how a company uses lobbying to educate members of the community around what they do. Because I kept thinking after last night, why would Susie Chant and David Eby support this project? Because they are our champions, in particular Susie Chant. I was like, why? So I thought, okay, how can I find out how much they know? And I remembered that basically they would have access, sorry, I don't know how to advance this. I have access to the lobbying records for both the provincial and the federal governments. And so I can see how many times Chemtrade has actually spoken to these people and to other people as well. So they do have a lobbying machine. It started in 2023. They hired Hill and Knowlton, very renowned government relations firm in public relations. And they also, so they registered Hill and Knowlton, and they registered 6 people in their own office. The complete lobbying record for the province follows. So Chemtrade met with varying people. This is normal, and this is all like totally good stuff. I just picked up a couple of anomalies that I want to point out. So between 2023 and the vote that you guys took, they met 14 times with different people. The last person that they met with before the vote was taken was Lori Halls, the Deputy Minister of Water, Land and Resource Stewardship. Before we go back to the province, I want to talk a little bit about the Fed. Sorry. Okay, we'll talk about the federal government. They did lobby Health Canada, Public Safety, and also Transport Canada. And I just want to make the point that with regard to their submission, there were no attestations from Health Canada or Public Safety Canada or Transport Canada with regard to the safety or necessity of chlorine, etc. So you could take the silence on that as meaning it was not important to them. I'm going to go back to, I'm going to go forward to a timeline that I developed. So if you remember on this slide, sorry about flipping through, the meetings that they had at the, after council denied the application, these ones are the most important ones. So they met with Susie Chant, they met with the major investment office, and they actually met with the premier of the province. Now I'm going to go forward to the timeline. So April 13th, that's when council voted to reject the rezoning. Then on April 24th, Chemtrade met with Premier Eby. On April 29th, the reconsideration letter came to the mayor. And May 12th was the deadline that was proposed, that was imposed in the sense for council to reconsider. So what's interesting about that, I think, is the people that they talked to. So they didn't talk to Lori Halls, after the application was denied. She putatively would have responsibility for water quality. They talked to the major investments office most and the premier's office. So why do I think they did that? If you look at the major investments office and the confluence of the products that Chemtrade makes, it's basically caustic soda and hydrochloric acid. And these industries, mostly the LNG industry, rely on this product. Also, Rio Tinto, the aluminum production manufacturer, Red Chris Mine, and the Critical Minerals Corridor. So I believe that that's the real reason that the province, I don't know if you've ever tried to get an audience with Premier Eby, it's not that easy. So what I think the real reason is that this is like a massive financial incentive to maintain the supply of caustic soda and hydrochloric acid. It is not council's job, it's council's job to protect citizens, not to manage the finances of the province or of private corporations. So I'm asking you to vote no to the application for a change to the zoning. Maybe the province could step up and solve the problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Heather Druje. The next speaker I have is Corey Cost. Oh, I don't see Corey in the room at the moment. I'll rotate. I'll come back to Corey. The next speaker then is Michael Graveson. Welcome. When you're comfortable, you have an additional 5 minutes to present to the hearing.
Thank you. Okay, first of all, I want to apologize for interrupting earlier. I hate to eat into my 5 minutes to answer questions that were either not answered or not answered, I think, correctly. I wanted to address a question by Mr. Ma from yesterday. I agree with you that the math is difficult, this kind of math. I'm a chemist, I'm a scientist, and when somebody says 10 to the minus 6, I fall asleep. I think the number you're looking for, in my opinion, what were the reductions in, how do you quantify the reductions in risk that based on the actions? Well, I showed you. The reductions are 80-ton rail car, because it's going to be in a building, so no problem there. 160-ton tank, that's 140 tons. There's still 3,000 tons. So you can do 140 divided by 3,000, or you can just say 0.0. That's my answer.
I'm going to pause you just for a second, Michael. Oh, there we go. Good. Can we make that full screen, Michael? Can you do it as slide?
Sorry.
Just so it's full screen?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. So
a little hard to.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
I'm pretty proud of this, but I didn't do it. Much of this, so, and the other question was about, alternatives. I want to make it clear, there are two bleach companies, we call them bleachers, in Western Canada, mainly. They're both in your backyard, Port Coquitlam and Langley. Brentag and Langley, ClearTech in Port Coquitlam. I've spoken to both of them. I know them very well. ClearTech says they supply 60% of the bleach in Western Canada. I would probably agree that they're probably 50-50. ClearTech gets all their chlorine from Airco in Saskatchewan. They get zero from Chemtrade. Brentag actually gets most of it from Chemtrade, but they also get some from Westlake and Longview. They want to have two suppliers in case something happens. But most of it from Chemtrade, I agree with that. ClearTech made it very clear, ClearTech, excuse the pun, that if ever they had the opportunity to supply 100%, it would be the best day ever. They could easily do it. They have the capacity. Airco spoke to them. They could supply easily all of the chlorine to ClearTech, so they could do that. So that's a comment. Okay, on to this presentation. Much of the discussion throughout this process has focused on only two options: maintaining the status quo or closing the facility. The status quo preserves jobs, tax revenue, industrial activity, and local chlorine production, but it also preserves the risks associated with liquid chlorine. Complete closure, on the other hand, removes the risks, but it also removes the jobs, tax revenue, and economic activity, at least until you replace it. But what if there was a third option that kept the benefits but eliminated the risk? Well, here it is, the safe alternative. Chemtrade can continue producing chlorine, caustic soda, hydrochloric acid, hydrogen, and other valuable products that serve the economy while ending the production, storage, and shipment of liquid chlorine. By the way, this is actually exactly the Port Authority's position. Everything right of the red line is on the port land. And I don't know if you see my cursor here, but that's the salt pad. This cell room right here is where the magic happens. That's where the salt turns into chlorine and caustic. It's the heart of the production. So the port is okay with the heart of the manufacturing staying on port land because they say, in a recent letter that you received this week, it predates the regulatory framework, which I assume is the 1984 amendment to the district zoning bylaw that created the prohibition on manufacturing hazardous substances. I'm not sure about that, but I think that's the only thing that was a regulatory framework. But all of the chloralkali manufacturing operations in North Vancouver predate that amendment. So why are they only restricting liquid chlorine and not the rest? Because they know that liquid chlorine is the problem. It's the most dangerous. That's why they're restricting it. And that's what you should do. The third option preserves everything everyone cares about: jobs, tax revenue, clean water, but removes the risk. This is not an experiment. This is a popular business model that already existed for many years. None of these 12 companies make or ship liquid chlorine. They make the same products as Chemtrade. They have a proportional number of employees, and they make tons of money. But don't take my word for it. Major Canadian banks and investment firms that regularly follow Chemtrade have already evaluated the impact of eliminating liquid chlorine. Well, you might say, why would I believe them? And Chemtrade tries to discredit anyone that doesn't agree with them. So why would you believe them? Because it's their job to assess future earnings and business risks. Their credibility depends on them being accurate. They are not advocates, activists, politicians, community groups, or competitors. They are financial professionals responsible for advising investors. And what did they conclude? Oops. Don't want to go to a punch. What did they conclude? That Chemtrade would remain a commercially successful company without liquid chlorine. What does this all mean? Let me mansplain this to you. We have just confirmed that the jobs and tax revenue are not at risk. I had to, whatever. This is actually a graph that shows the reduction in liquid chlorine shipments in 2004. What do you think happened here? Water treatment shifted to safer alternatives, safety and risk concerns were addressed, and more of the chlorine gas was used on site, chlorine derivatives. Most companies make up to 20 different products with their chlorine. How many does Chemtrade make? One. They make hydrochloric acid. See, I had to answer questions on my time.
You to draw to a close.
Okay, so this
come back for a third 5-minute segment once we've gone through the second time.
I can?
Yes, you can.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Awesome.
I see. So I'll now go to Corey Cost.
Apologies, I had to go to a meeting that I can't go to, which is right next door here for Andy Can. So I had to tell them I can't be here in two places. Okay, so there's one thing that I would like to bring out to the open. The public has never.
I'm going to press you to be nice and close to the microphone, please, Corey.
Yes. The public is never told about any leaks of chlorine on this plant that are less than 5 kilograms. But my studies show that that's sufficient to kill people in a fairly large area if you disperse that in plumes. So just a remark that sometimes what seems trivial can be relevant. Now, there was talk that freight costs double the price of a product. So I went and checked that. First, I sent you earlier that the historic pricing of bulk liquid chlorine in the United States shifted from the long-term table amount of $150 to $200 a ton to what it is now, $600 to $800 per ton. The value of chlorine has tripled. You think that might change somebody's business ethics or priorities? I don't know, but I did send the details to the council today. Now, I want to read out patiently that for a council whose paramount mandate is the physical safety of its immediate constituents, of its residents, the 90% export figure of the produced liquid chlorine changes the whole look of things. In other words, the plant's profile used to be an essential public utility and is now changed over into a commercial export operation dealing in highly hazardous materials. When you change from one role that benefits the community to one that increases the habit in municipal governance, a council can rationally justify exposing its residents to some level of managed risk if it directly secures their own critical surviving needs, like your own drinking water. However, forcing residents to live under the shadow of a worst case scenario plume for an export product fundamentally shatters that compromise and provides a powerful, rational catalyst to vote for a permanent shutdown of liquid chlorine production. That's a direct quote from AI that I got in fancy words, but you know what I'm getting at. It's important that the purpose of business is often to serve us, not the world, at a cost to our community of our own safety. So viewing that way, I hope council can be convinced to shut down the export of liquid chlorine from this plant. Thank you. Oh, one more little detail. I still have 55 seconds. Somebody quoted an electric rates, which are not in line with the customary rates for industrial plants like this, which consume quite a bit of electricity. So most of the region is served by BC Hydro, where transmission rates RS 1830 for massive industrial loads feature a flat energy charge of 4.914 cents per kilowatt hour. That is a lot cheaper than the typical 15 cents I pay once I go over the 10 cents rate. So are we subsidizing? Yes, I believe we are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your comments. Corey Cost. And you're correct. The residential rate is 9 cents per kilowatt hour for the stage 1 and 14 and a bit for stage 2. But the industrial rate's lower. The next speaker I have, a second time speaker, is Lori Parkinson. Welcome. You have an additional 5 minutes to.
Thank you. I won't be needing that long. I've just got a couple of comments that have come to mind. Shelter in place has been mentioned a few times, and I didn't catch it actually being described. My understanding is that it means that in event of a chlorine leak, you go home, stay home, and feel safe inside your home. That's what I think it means. And it's nice in theory. However, most houses have quite fluid air movement through their walls. New homes, much less. Old homes, a tremendous amount. So I don't think, if that's what shelter in place means, I don't think anyone should feel safe sheltering in place in an old home. I think the Energy Step Code has resulted in a whole lot tighter building, and that's fairly recent. Secondly, Chemtrade obviously has a great deal of safety equipment. However, many horrible accidents have happened due to human error. And I'm not mentioning ones to do with chlorine. Bhopal chemical accident has been mentioned already. That happened in India, killing 500,000 people. And that accident happened due to human error. I recently watched a program, the space shuttle that exploded, was due to engineers getting pressured to have the shuttle take off in really cold weather when they knew darn well that those O-rings were going to shrink and not function, but there was a lot of political pressure on them. So that was an error that caused a great deal of loss in life. Humans are always involved in operations in these facilities. Human error is always a possibility. As others have said, it's your first job to keep your community safe, to keep your constituents safe. Industry has to come second. Thank you.
Lori, just want to double check something. Did you say that the Bhopal disaster killed 500,000 people?
That's what AI just told me. It was the worst industrial accident in history, according to AI.
Killed about 4,000 people. There were about 500,000 that were affected by the gas.
4,000 people is still a lot.
It is.
Yeah. That is. I apologize for quick reading, but we don't want 5,000 or 4,000 North Van residents to be killed and a vast number have permanent lung damage either. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. The next second-time speaker I have is Dave Sadler. Welcome. When you're comfortable, you have an additional 5 minutes to address the hearing.
Once again, good evening, Council. Dave Sadler, 277 Roche Point Drive. I'm speaking against. Now, Chemtrade acquired the plant in 2017 after they purchased Nexus or Connexus. Now, they knew full well that chlorine production would cease in 2030. So they had 13 years to prepare. The company operates 60 chemical plants throughout Canada and the US. In 2025, their revenue was $2 billion. Now, I estimate the very lucrative North Van plant's income at $500 million, with 90% of the chlorine being shipped to the USA. Their CEO makes over $7 million a year, or at least he did in 2025, and his 4 underlings all made over $1 million each. So we're talking big bucks here, big money. If this company is making so much money, why wait years to apply new safety protocols which reduce but not eliminate risk? I'm very disappointed in Chemtrade's 11th hour tactics to try and get their lease extended for another 18 years. I'm embarrassed to say I'm actually a shareholder of this company. Finally, Council, I believe A firm, finite decision is required on this matter, so alternate sources of supply or suppliers can be found when the plant's chlorine phase out is complete. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Would anybody else like to address the hearing a first or second time? Yes. Is it Colin Armstrong?
Yes.
Welcome. When you're comfortable, you have 5 additional minutes.
You, your worship, council.
Colin Armstrong with Accutech, Senior Principal Engineer. And to recount, we conducted a quantitative risk assessment of the storage and transport of chlorine rail cars from the Chemtrade facility. Thank you. So coming back where we left off yesterday, Chemtrade's QRA lists the on-site stored chlorine rail cars as the #1 item in the highest far-field risk drivers. They themselves have identified that this is what's driving risk at the fence line and beyond. We briefly touched on this yesterday. This stored rail car breach is the only scenario that did not use publicly available data or data developed specifically as part of the QRA. That data was provided to Baker by Chemtrade. The report states that Baker didn't review the frequency data. They used what Chemtrade provided them. They also did not model smaller hole sizes, which I showed you last night, still have significant risks. That means they were ignored completely. If they're not included in those risk results, then that risk contour goes beyond what's shown. If we look at the analysis of the railcar breach, it evaluated just an evaporating liquid pool of chlorine. This does not match the incidents that have occurred. We looked at this yesterday. When we have a breach of a chlorine railcar, we have sudden, immediate vaporization of a significant inventory of chlorine. It's an immediate cloud that's generated. What actually happens is that 40% to 50% of that chlorine in a release vaporizes immediately. That's because the pressure of chlorine only remains a liquid because of the pressure, okay? When that pressure is lost, most of it will flash into a vapor immediately. Some can create a liquid pool that will more slowly evaporate. But 40 to 50% is vaporizing immediately. That was, according to the report, not evaluated. Only an evaporating pool was evaluated. Those results come from modeling using very widely accepted tools in the chemical industry. I asked one of my engineers today to compare a pool vaporization model to a release model from a tank that accounts for the flashing of the droplets, that initial 40% vaporization. What do we see? We see that lethal distances extend far further. Why? It's simple. More vapor is being considered in the model. We're actually considering the release that occurs. We're considering that liquid chlorine flashes, droplets are formed, they evaporate. Some is left in a pool that will more slowly evaporate. Yes, it is a very long duration event, as stated in the QRA report, but that immediate flashing is significant. We compare those distances. If I look at just a pool slowly evaporating, I'll get that orange circle that's right there. If I consider the flashing from liquid pressurized chlorine releasing, you go out to that red circle. That red circle wasn't considered in the risk assessment. So these contours are based on only evaporation of a pool. The study didn't consider smaller hole sizes. It's interesting to note that the longest distance we see is actually on the smaller hole size, because when you're exposed to chlorine for a long duration, like from a small leak, it's actually more lethal. The frequency basis was from the 2006 QRA study. We haven't been provided that study for review. It wasn't reviewed by Risk Tech either, and they did draw questions about it, although they didn't dig into those, and I think they should have. And the model didn't account for 40% of the chlorine vaporization that we would expect. So if the frequency was not fully documented or fully considered, the consequence was underestimated, then the risk contour that's shown that goes conveniently right to the fence line is wrong, and it extends beyond the fence line. But remember, that's just for the stationary rail car. What happens when it leaves the site? The proximity to the population decreases. You have reduced emergency response capability. You have no more buffer from the industrial zone. You go to public traffic crossings, as Peter just said, where you have accidents. You have reduced security, higher speeds, higher accident risks. We evaluated those. Those risk contours go far into the community. These use actual traffic accident statistics, actual track class, actual speeds, publicly published data on the probability of pressurized rail car releases in the event of a derailment. Still only considering 6 in 1,000 would puncture and have any release in the event of a derailment. But derailments happen, and we're talking about low likelihood but catastrophic risks. 100 schools in the high-risk zone, numerous hospitals and senior living care facilities, numerous high-density housing locations in zones that MIAC says are unacceptable. The same risk criteria that's being used to say that the on-site risk is acceptable.
Draw to a close, please.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your comments. Colin Armstrong. Would anybody else like to address the hearing for a second time? So yes, and then there. So, but yes, I'll start over here. Yeah. I think you've already spoken at the hearing, but if you could start with your name for the record, that would be appreciated.
Yes, Kelly Thomas, Baker Engineering Risk Consultants. Not to be argumentative, but we did evaluate the liquid release as well. It was done based on the 10-minute release per the EPA RMP. It's correct that we did not independently assess the frequency of that release. We took it from the existing QRA. We did today look at smaller releases, and it doesn't move the risk boundary at the, oh geez, roadway Spencer? Spicer, sorry, Spicer Road. We looked at 2-inch release based on pressure vessel frequencies and then a small gasket release, and it doesn't move the frequency, the risk contour at that location. It does if you're in the rail yard. It doesn't if you're out at the roadway, member of the public. So just clarifying.
Okay, thank you very much. And on the aisle up here, yes, please. Thank you. I think you spoke first time the other day, but you spoke already once, right? Yeah. But if you could start with your name for the record, that'd be great. Thank you.
Ben Wall.
There you go. Thank you. When you're ready, you have 5 minutes to address the hearing a second time.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Council. Ben Wall, representing NHC. We did the flood hazard assessment for Chemtrade's rezoning. Today, I just want to add on to what I talked about yesterday and walk you through some of the results of our flood hazard assessment. As a recap, yesterday we talked about the standards that have to be used to address flood hazard on site. So that's the flood construction levels mainly, when we looked at both the river and the coastal hazards that were presented. So looking more specifically at the hazards on site, here you can see a map of the flood hazard across Chemtrade's current operation. So typically what we're seeing is 0.3 to 0.5 meter depths across site. This doesn't mean this is going to impact operations. This means it's the standard that they have to build to. So everything below this flood construction level would have to be built to be flood, to reduce any flood risk. In terms of coastal flooding, we also assessed this separately. So this is looking at only coastal flooding from the Burrard Inlet. We looked at extreme water levels, sea level rise into the future to the year 2100, and also the effects of waves. And this is how far we would expect water to come in. Again, like we stated before, the flood construction level is based on both of these. So we combine these at the end of the day to consider both coastal and river flood risk and take the maximum of each. We also had heard previously in previous hearings that there was concern about tsunami risk. And we evaluated this as well in our flood hazard assessment. So we evaluated it based on many published studies, and tsunami risk isn't a threat at this site. Any tsunami, by the time it hits the site into the Burrard Inlet, the level of the wave would be below the elevation of the site. So based on this study, we had a few recommended mitigations, similar to what I said yesterday. We had the flood construction levels. It's about 4.3 to 4.7 meters in this datum, which is roughly above sea level. That translates to about 0.3 to 0.5 meters above ground on site. This is what they have to build everything to be flood resistant to. And then on top of this, this also considers material containment. And they would also have to include all of this information in their emergency response plan, which would also be reviewed to ensure that flood risk is completely mitigated across site. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for your comments, Ben Wall.
Mayor Little, can we just make sure that all of the PowerPoints that are being presented by all speakers, we get copies of those?
We have the images that get shared in it, but yes, if anybody who's done a PowerPoint presentation wishes to email it to us, because it was part of the presentation, I think it's fair that that can even show up after closure because it's not new information. Is that fair?
Thank you, through the chair. Yes, that'd be correct.
So as long as they're not altered from the presentation, then they would be accepted after closure because they don't represent new information. And what's the best way for them to send that in?
Thank you, through the chair. If they could be sent to input@dnv.org, input@dnv.org, please.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you. Okay. Would anybody else like to address the hearing a first or second time? Yes, please. What I intend to do is I'm going to have a break around 7:30, and then we'll give staff a chance to collate the questions at that time. We'll have a bit of a 5-minute break, and then we'll return after that. When you're ready, if you could provide your name for the record, but you have 5 minutes to address the hearing, please.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship of Council. My name is Jason Feenstra. I am an employee of Chemtrade. I have not been asked to come here and speak on behalf of them. So I've worked for Chemtrade for almost 10 years. I can still remember the first time I walked onto their site. I was a little younger then. Didn't really know what to expect. Just a farm kid from out in the valley. 10 years later, seen a few things. There's 3 things I've seen really. It's the right people, the right processes, and the right results. I'm really privileged to lead and work with the best team of electrical and controls professionals that I've met. These are people who have the training and have put in the personal effort to become experts in their fields. Canadian Red Seal apprenticeship systems, industry-specific training, and a lot of hard work has created world-class professionals. They're professionals who are used to starting early and going home late when the job requires. Hopefully something we will not be doing here today. The right process is also something I've seen on a daily basis over the last 10 years. Strict engineering designs, rigorous design, operations reviews, and continual improvement of our processes is not something that happens once in a while. This is a daily activity. The right results, the last 70 years, Chemtrade in North Vancouver has continued to be a safe and contributing member of this community. Safe, responsible production of a product that is used by the entire surrounding community to keep people safe from potentially harmful water while providing important economic stimulus to the community. Sounds like a really good result. I hope you're going to support this. I think we have a choice today to vote no and watch more of the manufacturing jobs that built our province move to another country, vote no and watch our Canadian economy shrink, or vote yes to keeping Canadian jobs, yes to maintaining control of our critical supply chains, and yes to keeping Canada a competitor in the manufacturing technology space. Canadian engineering sector has a rich history that includes the design of the Avro Aero, CANDU nuclear reactor, the first pacemaker, and the first alkaline battery. We've done this. We have the people. Those men and women, they wouldn't have supported pushing production to another country. Allowing more of the manufacture of critical chemicals to come from another country is a difficult choice given the recent trade conflicts, something I think most of us are fairly well acquainted with, and transportation challenges like the Abbotsford floods of 2021 that severed our highway and rail links to the rest of Canada. Do we truly believe that the USA is the better choice to safely produce these products and will be a reliable source of these drinking water treatment chemicals? Or are we willing to trust the Canadians who've been working to safely produce these chemicals for the last 70 years? These men and women, the men and women of this site, they have a proven track record of producing these chemicals safely for the rest of Canada to use. I'm just here to ask you to allow them to keep doing their job. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Jason Feenstra. Right. Would anybody else like to address the hearing a first or second time? Please, Mr. Bocock.
I apologize. The previous one, previous speaker says left to drive here and has disabled this auto find feature. And I forgot my glasses. All right. Chris Bocock. I've spoken to you before, previous fire chief, retired from the Burnaby Fire Department. I want to talk about the DOT 105 clearing rail cars. This is a significant issue for me specifically in speaking to the council in Burnaby, in union representatives representing firefighters in Burnaby, New West, and across the province. Liquid chlorine presents a real risk to those individuals that protect our community and face hardships and long-term industrial illnesses as is. And these present incidents that are very troubling to them. In a recent document within this process, Chemtrade identified that there has never been a release from a next generation car during transport. So related to the DOT 105. Technically correct, but slightly misleading. This is 2026, that's a typo. In 2016, Axial Corporation in New Martinsville, West Virginia, had a rupture of a DT 105 rail car and subsequent chlorine release. The National Transportation Safety Board did a study, and the findings were these, that what had occurred is that rail car had been pushed in to be serviced, to be inspected. We've heard about the engineering, about the robust systems and maintenance that takes place, and I would suggest those are completely in place. That rail car was certified, recertified in its routine inspection, deemed good to go. It was loaded, pushed out of the building, which protected it from release, out into the storage yard, and then a release of just over 80 tons of chlorine occurred over 2.5 hours. The significance of that is within 2 minutes, the atmosphere was immediately dangerous to life within the facility. That's a very short response time, and that goes to testify to the point of what an actual chlorine release looks like. It's a very dynamic nature, and it's less like a pool evaporating and far more like a very dynamic release, as you saw in the footage from Jordan. Additionally, the exposures into the community within 2 minutes started to border on life-threatening effects of life. That's a very short period of time. We're asking citizens to respond and protect themselves from this type of an issue. The chlorine impact distance was a 5-mile radius, and note the position of the command post. It was 4 miles from the center. That's a long distance away. The 5 mile radius is also interesting. I believe that's about 8 kilometers. That distance from a rail car, if we do understand that Lions Gate Hospital is 4.3 kilometers from a facility. So well within the evacuation radius of an actual chlorine release that occurred. In this case, in Marshall County, the population is very low and compared to the District of North Vancouver. But I would suggest that a evacuation plan that has details surrounding the evacuation requirements of up to 400,000 residents. I'd very much like to see that plan. I would assume that plan is fairly aspirational, meaning it has some things we would like to do and like to see, but vetting of that plan by exercise and how that's actually going to occur, what the time elapses for evacuating those people across the roadways are, what that looks like, would be very interesting indeed to me. The question in that plan is the detail. So for me, the interesting piece is that statement that there has never been a release from a next generation car. And I wondered why the statement during transport occurred. I think the incident was omitted. And I think it was omitted because that car was not in transit, but it was in the yard for all intents and purposes, whether it's in transit or whether it was in loading. I think the case is the same. It identifies a potential weakness in a car that's been engineered to be acceptable, to be able to deliver this without release, and yet right after certification, right at the point that it was deemed most appropriate, it was loaded and suffered a 42-inch crack, which released its entire contents. Engineering is great. I have great appreciation for engineers and the safety of the workers. I have absolute faith that the workers work safely in an absolute professional manner, but we are seeing worst case scenarios occurring over and over again. And I do not want to see it in the District of North Vancouver. I don't want to see it in the city of Burnaby or New West, where the rail line is immediately adjacent to Royal Columbian Hospital. Evacuating the Royal Columbian Hospital on a 2-minute warning to lethal exposure is something I'm not interested. I would participate in, and I think it would break me, the heartbreak that you would see at an event like that. I don't want to see that. I think there's better ways that we can treat water by other means other than use of liquid chlorine. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Chris Bocock. I have a second-time speaker, and then we're going to take a break. The second-time speaker, virtually, I believe, is Henry Ward.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, clearly. Welcome. You have 5 additional minutes to speak to the hearing.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Little and members of the council. I would just like to comment on the remarks made by the most recent speaker. I think it's a classic example of having some incorrect information. The specification that he talks about is the DOT 105 tank car. But you have to look at the entire specification for tank cars to understand really what you're talking about. The traditional chlorine tank car was a DOT 105 J500W tank car, and you have to look at all of those characteristics to understand what the car really was. By contrast, the new next generation chlorine tank car is a DOT 105 H600W tank car. Very significant difference in those. The most significant difference in the cars I'll touch on. One, the car involved in the Martinsville, West Virginia incident was an older tank car made out of non-normalized steel. Those are no longer allowed to be produced, and none of the next generation tank cars are constructed of non-normalized steel. That particular type of material of construction is subject to brittle fracture, meaning a small crack very quickly can become a very large crack, especially when it's exposed to extreme temperature differences like with cold chlorine. Next generation tank cars are all manufactured of normalized steel, which are not subject to brittle fracture, which we saw in that incident. The other issue is that car was a 105J500W, meaning it's a car that's tested to a 500 PSI rating, which practically means that it has less thick steel shell than the next generation tank car, which is a 105H600, which is rated for up to 600 PSI, and it has a much thicker steel construction. It's 1-inch shell on that car. So again, I want to point out the difference. So the car that was being referenced is not a next generation tank car, and the next generation tank car is not subject to the same type of failure that we saw in that incident. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Henry Ward. Okay. I said we would take a break around 7:30, and I'm prepared to call a 5-minute break, and then we'll return and see additional questions of clarification from council and their responses from staff. So have a stretch, grab a water. There's a water fountain at the front corner and washrooms, and we'll get back to it in about a little over 5 minutes. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to resume the meeting. All right, so we're going to do a check back in with staff on questions of a clarifying nature from the council. And so if you can read the question and provide your response, that would be appreciated.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do have quite a few questions from Mayor and Council. And the one question is, what is the industry standard insurance policy? And during the last public hearing, the following question was asked, and then response was provided. Chemtrade has a significant liability insurance in place, totaling more than $500 million through the FM Global. FM Global has a reputation of only insuring clients who are serious about engineered risk reduction. There are a unique insurance company as they do not employ a single actuary. Rather, they rely on engineers for underwriting risk. They have spent considerable time at all our larger sites, including North Van, and then have insured us since we bought the site in 2017. The next question is why would we not seek clarification from those who are using the. Okay, so this one is a multi-part question. I think the first part of the question was responded by the applicant, which is what how many tons of chlorine that was represented by the 40%. Right. Correct. And then the second part, the question was to ask the people who are actually using the product or producing the product. So the second part of that question is, if the plant ceases, who are the producers in Canada that could make up this shortfall? And then the third part of that question is, will it be difficult for them to make up this gap? So through this public hearing, we know that there are 3 additional producers that can produce the same product, and that is Urco in Saskatchewan and Allin and Westlink in Quebec. And they make up 100% in total. There's 4 producers, 100% of the liquid chlorine production in Canada. And so with regards to asking the producer themselves to determine, will it be difficult for them to make up this gap? This is a very difficult question to answer, because this is a market with there's supply side and there's demand side, and staff would be actually seeking the applicant's competitors for information. And so, there is business information, investment information that outside producers may not be readily available to willing to provide those answers to staff.
I just have a follow-up then, but we're going to ask anyway.
I want to be clear with that. I don't intend to ask the competitors whether they can step in and fill the gap. Where I would
I just want to understand if it's as challenging as it's being made out to. That's all I'm trying to seek. So yeah. I'm sorry, Mayor Little. I'm a bit concerned about the how we're proceeding with some of these answers, because it's like we're determining ourselves before we even request information from those that are able to possibly give us the answer, possibly not. But what I've heard from staff is that we believe it's going to be difficult for the competitors to answer this question before we even ask. So I think going forward, we're going to have to review how we do this, because I've made note of a couple of moments during this hearing tonight that I have concern, and this is another one that I'm going to add to that list. So I would like us to reach out to those manufacturers to find out if this is something that they could provide if this plant ceases to operate.
Yeah, and so I think it's outside of the scope of the question before us, which is the application for this property. I don't have a lot of comparators. We don't deal in heavy industry of this scale for other things within the municipality, but obviously if someone was applying to build a housing project, and we wouldn't be asking their competitors what they would do if that housing project didn't pass, right? Like it's going to the competition to answer the questions. It also has a conflict and a bias with it that I don't think gives us. That's why I think my question to staff was, if there are unanswered questions, what neutral parties could help us answer those questions? And so we'll do our best to seek out neutral responses before third reading on those matters if we can't get them before the hearing closes.
I believe Mr. Gravison did say that he believed that there was an ability for other producers to be able to supply this. So I think in one way, another speaker at this hearing has offered their perspective or their opinion in regards to this.
Well, you are welcome to accept that position, which suggests.
Well, then I would be doing the same thing that I criticized earlier when I suggested that the applicant shouldn't be answering on behalf of Metro Vancouver. So I'm not going to do that.
Our best to get a neutral response, but as you said, there was a response in the room that said that the market could provide an alternative.
If I could just jump in with a suggestion here as to another neutral party, that would be something like Health Canada, the people that regulate this industry.
We will try to find a suitable neutral person who can comment on that piece.
Thank you.
Next question, please, Yanze.
Thank you. What is the rate Chemtrade pays per kilowatt hour for electricity, and what is the yearly consumption, and how does that compare with the BC residents pay per kilowatt per hour for our homes, and to what extent are residents subsidizing Chemtrade's cost of electricity? So the applicant has advised, this is also was part of the last public hearing in terms of their electricity demand, that Chemtrade is one of BC Hydro's largest customer, and its annual spend with BC Hydro is approximately 25 million. The applicant has not provided the direct annual kilowatt per hour consumption, but note that they also have on-site diesel generated power, which can be activated to allow for a safe shutdown of the facility in the event of power outage. And as part of the planned safety upgrade, new generators will also be added to ensure their emergency vent scrubbers within the rail loading enclosure will also function in the event of a power loss. So the applicant has large industrial or transmission customers that have a different rate. So the applicant informed me that the rate is RS 2801, and staff are not quite sure how directly, what is that translating into rate? I'm asking the applicant that question. So by comparison, BC Hydro's posted residential rate is $11.87 per kilowatt per hour for tier 1, and $14.08 per kilowatt per hour for tier 2. And then there is also a residential flat rate of $12.70 per kilowatt per hour. And so to the last portion of this question, to what extent are residents subsidizing chemtrails cost of electricity. Again, this is a question that beyond the capability of staff to answer. We would have to ask BC Hydro to do some analysis and come up with that answer. So.
Okay, I'll just challenge one of the numbers there. I don't think it's $12 per kilowatt hour. It might be 12 cents per kilowatt hour. But other than that,
oh, sorry, 12.7 cents. So sorry, 11.87 cents per kilowatt hour for tier 1 and 14.08 cents for tier 2.
In California is not that much. That's why I was. Okay, so thank you very much for those responses. What is your next question read into the record with a response, please?
Where is the mitigation plan, municipal, regional, provincial, federal, for the safety of water treatment, given the pending completion of chemtrade lease? So although there is a shared responsibility for safe drinking water supply, other levels of the government have different roles, such as policy making, guidelines making, testing, public education, etc. The primary government agency responsible for overseeing the treatment of safe drinking water supply for our region is Metro Vancouver. And you have heard from the statement from Metro Van earlier tonight that they are prepared to mitigate supply chain risk by working with their suppliers. And this will need to be developed over the next few years prior to the end of the chemtrade current lease. The next question is, does Port Metro Van have an option to purchase the land chemtrade sits on, given Port Metro Van position on trade, not manufacturing? Why would they option the property if the security and the treatment of water is such an issue and the manufacturing is contrary to their mandate? So Port Metro Vancouver provided the following statement. For the first part of the question, yes, there is an option to purchase. However, it is a commercial arrangement, with one of the primary reasons being to ensure access to VFPA lands in the future if current circumstances change. We have agreements with chemtrade that this current rezoning chemtrade is seeking does not trigger VFPA to exercise our option to purchase. And part 2, under the Port Authority's enabling legislation, manufacturing activities as a primary land use are generally not intended for the federal lands we manage within the Burrard Inlet area. However, manufacturing activities that predate this legislation may continue indefinitely. The next question is with respect to the presentation by Robin Kinsley, the total number of loaded rail shipments between 2020 and 2025 in North America was 18,005. Okay, so between 2024, and the question is about at 99.9944 chlorine rail shipments delivered without a leak. That means there only was one rail shipment that resulted in a leak. Is my number correct? And please define rail shipment. So I think Ms. Kinsley is still available online, and she would be happy to provide a response to this question, which generally confirms that the assumption is correct.
She's just. She's
rejoining.
Okay. We don't normally cross-examine people who have just signed up to speak at the meeting. She is not with the applicant or district identified. So this is a question that you can't answer without her additional information.
In fact, she has provided a written response. I'm happy to provide that.
Right.
So based on the figures provided, the calculation is correct. If there were 18,005 loaded chlorine rail shipments, and then 99.9944% were delivered without a leak, then approximately 0.0056% resulted in a leak. That equates about to one shipment. So staff understand that the rail shipment means one loaded chlorine rail car movement from origin to destination. And staff would recommend that the applicant confirm the definition of the rail shipment.
One rail car. Okay. Next question and response, please.
Would staff be able to determine when the accident occurred in the video shown by Colin Armstrong and in which country it occurred? So this is referring to a gas leak accident that occurred in Jordan in 2022. It was a leak from a storage tank that was dropped. The next question is in the presentation by Mr. Alan Robinson. I believe it was indicated that 83% of the Chemtrace tanker cars are of the model DOT 105H600W, and it is expected that by end of 2027, all tanker cars will be of that standard. Could a term of Section 219 covenant require Chemtrade to only use this type of tanker cars? And as part of that best achievable technology review, could Chemtrade be required to use even the newer tank cars should the standard be increased during the 20-year term as stated in the covenant? So I'm going to have to pass this on to the applicant to respond, please.
Yeah, the first part of the question will be that as of the end of 2027, the government regulations will not allow you to ship old rail cars. So everybody will have to ship chlorine in those new rail cars. So the answer is yes, we could write that in, we could do whatever we want, but we won't be able to use a different rail car anyway. That will be the only rail car that can be used. In terms of writing into the covenant and best achievable technology, I would say the answer is yes to that as well. All I would say is that when you do the shopping of these cars, which is placing the order and getting them ready, there's usually, like right now, there's about a 2-year lead time. So you just have to factor in time frame when there's a new regulation that comes in place, and the experts on the phone could confirm, but usually there's a 20-year window that they put in place on railcar technology. And when those become available, then there's usually like I said, a 2-year waiting time to get things built. So, but all that can be factored into the covenant and the best achievable technology.
We'll have one more question coming in, which is what PSI is liquid chlorine stored at in a 600 PSI tank car? Could someone from the applicant team answer this question?
Hi, I'm Brian Ritchie from Chemtrade. Chlorine is what we call cryogenic liquid. So what that means is the pressure of the liquid depends on the temperature. The warmer the liquid, the higher the pressure. What temperature it's stored at depends on, what pressure it's stored at depends on the temperature that it's stored at. The reason why we store it in a 600-pound rail car is because the temperature is never going to get high enough so that the pressure gets anywhere near 600 pounds. In fact, it doesn't get anywhere near the PSV setting of 375. So there isn't an exact number. You can't give you an exact number. In the winter, it's colder, the pressure's lower. In the summer, it's warmer, the pressure's higher. I've seen rail cars that are plants as high as 175, 200 PSI. But it just depends. That's in a summer condition in the prairies on a hot summer day. So rule of thumb.
But under normal conditions, about a third of what the car is rated for.
That would be accurate. Under extreme conditions, I would say, not normal conditions, a maximum.
Under extreme conditions.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it doesn't. It's just the temperature.
Okay. Thank you. All right, we're going to return back to speakers. I'll just give another opportunity for first or second time speakers.
Yeah.
And virtual participants, again, raise your virtual hand. Okay, Right, would anybody else like to address the hearing a first, second, or third time? Okay, I've got two, so I'm going to go with Michael Graveson and Peter Teven.
Okay, I'll try to finish my previous presentation pretty quick. I think this is the most important place to start, even though I already went over this. So the third option, I mean, as you can see, you keep all the good stuff and you get rid of the bad stuff. I don't know how anybody could not consider this. Yes, it's a challenge for the applicant. There's some work to do. Others have done it, and I think it's worth it for the community, and they're still going to make $110 million of EBITDA profit per year if they do this. That's what the analyst said, and you can believe the analysts. I'm going to get to my graph. So this is still a lot. I mean, this looks like, I don't want to mislead and make you think that that red line's going to zero. This is liquid chlorine shipped in the US, because I don't have the stats for Canada, per day. Okay. Now, what we're looking at is that in 2004, it was about 130,000 tons. Well, let's call it 12,000 tons per day. That's a lot. That was about 50% of all the chlorine made. So basically people were liquefying a lot of it. And since then, again, because of switches for all safety based, customers switch, therefore producers switch, whatever. There's less shipments, and it's down to about, now this is speculation for 2021 to 2026. That part is based on market intelligence that I have. I've been told that the number now is, well, this is a Chlorine Institute graph, by the way, that I kind of took out some noise, so the lady from Chlorine Institute can confirm. But into 2021, and by the way, I wish you guys would update it soon. 2021, it was down to 4,000 tons per day. What I'm told is divide that by half to get to 2026. It's probably not exactly right, but you can see the direction, and that's what we're suggesting should be done. The real story we shouldn't forget is that the reason why Chemtrade ships, and not just them, I'll be honest, I mean, most, especially in Canada, there's not a lot of demand for chlorine. All of the producers of chlorine in Canada, because they can't get the caustic without making the chlorine, they just export it so they can get to the caustic. Caustic is by far the highest profit product any of these companies make. Okay, so that's why they make it. Now, with most chlorine derivatives, including hydrochloric acid, which Chemtrade makes, you get the caustic. And Chemtrade actually, I think they, and I'm going to, again, speculate, I don't work for them, but when they got the sunset date back in whatever it was, 2007, that they'd have to stop doing this in 2030, they actually added a lot of HCl capacity, which was good. And at the same time, you know, the oil sands were people started fracking, you need HCl. They have about, I think, double the capacity of what they're making today. So they could actually double their production today without much capital because they already have it. And they would get the caustic and then add a bunch of other products. Like I said, most companies, some make up to 20 different products with their chlorine. Chemtrade could make at least 2. Okay. The best available technology, I mean, the best available technology that Chemtrade will do in 2041 is to make sure they're using the best available technology to make chlorine. They are using the best available technology. It doesn't change a lot. They switched from diaphragm to membrane back in 2010. And at that time, they'll find out, oh, it's still membrane, so we're good. The best available technology today for you is what I've been talking about, third option. Okay, I talked about this before. I want to cover other things, so I'm going to go quickly. I've checked, legal opinion says that you are allowed to include ending liquid chlorine in the covenant if you wanted to, okay? And I sent you guys examples of that. I want to address some things. This is information that I was very hesitant to share because I am semi-retired, but I'll probably be retired because some people are going to be upset, but I don't know how your water tastes right now, but for the last 6 months, Brentag has been having some problems making bleach. I don't think Metro had any problems. They don't even know. You want to know why? Because Olin in Quebec has been shipping rail cars of bleach to Brentag. Now, Brentag has been running. They're not down completely, but they've been supplementing so that nobody notices. We have in our industry what we call mutual aid. There is no problem with somebody helping out or the gap of treating the water. It's already happening right now. Nobody ever noticed. Second thing on the rail cars, in about 10 years, we're going to be talking about something that happened with the new rail cars that we have now. We're going to blame it on the new rail cars that are now old. And we're going to say we're going to switch to the new rail cars. There's always improvement, but there's always going to be problems. Okay. Lastly, I was wanted to comment, as the mayor asked, about what I think about the new information that was provided. A bunch of reports that will say that they are doing what they said they would do and all of that. I mean, and then a sunset date, they don't respect sunset dates. That's why we're here now. So I don't think that any of that new information is valid, at all for a reconsideration. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Michael Graveson. Now we have Peter Teven, again joining us for a third and final time. And again, just we'll try not to have repeats of earlier information.
Thank you. If you could display the overhead. Sorry, I've got this document on my iPad. Yeah, I know it's difficult to see. And just advice to staff, based on Councillor Mary's request that slide decks be sent, and the earlier rail story that I told you about, and this document, I've sent them all to input at dnv.org. But on the guest Wi-Fi, it won't let me sync up to the mail server on Shaw. So they're sitting there in my outbox and hold. I don't know if you're going to close this soon, but they probably won't send until I get home.
I'm sure we can accommodate that.
Yeah.
If there's
so that's what I want to advise you.
Yeah.
Is that I'm trying to do this. Okay. So just for the record, actually, Your Worship, I have 3 additional topics that are all new I could talk about if I'm given the chance, but I'll address this one now. You asked a question. Did the new information presented in any way change my mind or what I feel council ought to do? And the answer is, yeah, it made me absolutely more certain of the position that I held, that now is the time to cease liquid chlorine operation in North Vancouver for the good of the people. And, to be frank, I foresee a future in British Columbia where Chemtrade would probably willingly cease chlorine operation, because the future of energy is LNG, and their hydrochloric acid is used for that. And I can foresee a time in our future when there'll be such a demand for hydrochloric acid that Chemtrade would go, we're not going to bother with chlorine anymore. We're doing too much business with HCl. But, you've been presented, and you remember when I started this, last night, I told you you were going to be presented with narratives and you were going to be presented with a path forward. Now, I know it is not, I'm not a council member, I'm not a lawyer. But, I've got experience in coming to these meetings, and I know it's not your job to dictate the business model of an applicant. Your job is to say yes or no to what they apply for. I understand that. I would advise you keep saying no until you get the right proposal, because you made the right decision on April 13th, and I'm even more adamant. Now, what this document is, we took the additional information document, and I haven't seen a public hearing in my time attending DNV's meetings where we had this much volume of public information and rushing in at late dates and You know, I've all been a bug in your ear saying, where is this? I've heard about that document. Why isn't it posted? We want to look at it. You know, there's a ton of information. I personally think this is one of the most complicated files and decisions any DNV council has ever had to decide. And I, you know, really feel for you. We've tried to, you know, me and anybody I know have been trying to be available to you. One of the things, and I'll just respond, Councillor Murray, the topic that you asked about, I actually have firsthand testimony from a competitor, not to Chemtrade, but to Brentech, one of the bleach manufacturers. I did this unique thing. I phoned up their customer service line. And I said, you know, I had heard that one of the two bleach manufacturers in Metro Vancouver does not buy chlorine from Chemtrade. I heard it from someone else. I wanted to verify it myself. I phoned up their customer service line. They ended up putting me through to a very senior manager. And I'll tell you what, that was a great conversation. It really educated me a lot on the chlor-alkali industry. And that person said a lot of complimentary things about Chemtrade. He said, look, you know, I don't really want to go on the record. I've been watching this whole thing. You know, I don't want to get involved. He said, Chemtrade is a great chlor-alkali operator. But Peter, you asked me a specific question. The question you asked is, if Chemtrade ceased making liquid chlorine by 2030, to what degree would that put the supply of liquid chlorine that I use at my Port Coquitlam facility at risk? And the specific answer to your specific question is exactly 0%. He said, I do not buy liquid chlorine from Chemtrade. I get it from Saskatchewan. So that's firsthand. Council, I've never lied to you before. That person doesn't want to be public, but if you want to contact me privately, I'll tell you who I was speaking with. But that's the information I got. I think that clears up that matter for you. But this document here, I've sent it to you and it will arrive later tonight. What it does is it compares the additional information file from before the June 1st updates and then after. And some startling things pop off the page. And so, Council, I send it to you thinking it'll be very beneficial to you because for me, it confirmed everything I've been saying. That, you know, this whole picture has never been about chlorine. It's been about caustic. And you might remember I wrote you saying, hey, well in advance of June 1st, I wrote you after this conversation with the fellow from ClearTech. He explained the industry to me. And here's what he said. This industry is long on chlorine and it's short on caustic. Are you getting the clues that I'm giving you? And I said, yes, thank you.
You can draw to a close, please.
Thank you, I will. And this document also, which is totally unbiased because it's AI that compared the two versions, and it will spell that out for you. So I invite you to read it. Okay.
Thank you very much for your comments. Peter Teven. Would anybody else like to address the hearing a first, second, or third time? I believe I have Robin Kinsley. Robin over. A virtual participant that would like to speak. I believe it's a third time. It's a third time.
Hi, yes, this is my third time, but since I was brought up a couple of testimonies ago, I just wanted to jump in. That particular chart that showed the number of shipments, that particular chart was not familiar to me, but I imagine that data was derived from what we call pamphlet 10, which is the North American chlorine production capacity. We used to collect that every year from our chlorine production members, but in about 2020, that was the last year we collected that information because around that time, the market had consolidated enough. The membership was no longer comfortable reporting that to us and then us aggregating it and reporting it back out. So when our members are interested in that type of market information, we rely on an independent third party to get that information. However, you can get chlorine railcar shipment numbers from the Association of American Railroads. They issue an annual hazardous materials rail report that shows the top 125 hazardous materials moved by rail. And so that's where my shipment numbers were coming from.
Okay, thank you very much, Robin Kinsley. Okay, would anybody else like to address the hearing a first, second, or third time? Again, reminding virtual participants, if you raise your virtual hand, we'll move you over to the panel. Okay, checking in with staff. Have you received any additional questions of clarifying nature from council that you have a response to?
Yeah. Yes, Your Worship, just one more question. Can council amend the covenant to include ending liquid chlorine in 2030 before it comes back to council for the next reading? So just in terms of the end date of 2030, council can give that direction to staff, but that is not what the applicant has proposed, and staff are bound to evaluate the proposal made by the applicant, which is a sunset date of 2046. And in fact, the applicant in our review process have stated that 2030 as an end date would not be viable for them because of the significant investment that they're going to have to do to make that facility. So I think staff and the district, the applicant has to be willingly to enter into the covenant with us, so we cannot do this unilaterally. I just wanted to state that. But in terms of the process, the covenant will need to be drafted after council give third reading of the bylaw with a new motion of that end date of 2030. So, hopefully after confirmation that the applicant is able to live with this condition.
Okay, thank you very much. Going back to public input, would anybody else like to address this meeting first, second, or third time? So I'm going to move towards exhausting the speakers list. It's a little bit archaic, but it's just to be sure. You'd be surprised how many times people just throw their hand up at the last minute that this was just the nudge to get them to say what they came here to say. So would anybody else like to address this hearing for a first, second, or third time? For a second time, would anybody else like to address this hearing for a first, second, or third time? And for a third and final time, would anybody else like to address this hearing for a first, second, or third time? Seeing no speakers, then I'll look to the clerk. We, at this point, I believe, have exhausted the speakers list.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so now I'll look to council for a motion. Councillor Hanson, you have a motion.
So I move that this public hearing be closed and the matter be referred to the next appropriate time for second and third reading.
Great, thank you. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Back. Prepared to call the question. All in favor? Contrary minded? Motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, council. So what that means is, actually, sorry, before I go on to my little speech at the end, I always ask, when are we likely to have this item back for consideration at third reading?
Thank you through the chair. This item is tentatively scheduled to return on Monday, July 6th for third reading.
So Monday, July 6th is a tentative date. You have to wait until the week before and double check the agenda in case something else bumped it or there was a reason to bump it. But that is our tentative intended date at this point. What this means now that we're in closure is that council can't receive any new information. We'll make the stated exception for Mr. Teven's email that is caught in the interwebs here. But other than that, the matter is closed. Council can't receive new additional information for consideration. That doesn't mean the public can't actually talk to staff anymore. If you have questions of clarification from the staff, you can still submit those for consideration. You just can't talk directly to the council with new information about this particular issue. And that's that. Councillor Forbes.
Slide that will be accepted. Maybe the PowerPoint.
Yes, yes, they're not considered new information. As long as they aren't altered and they match what was presented in the meeting, absolutely we can get them to an electronic format. Councillor Pope?
And what about the questions that we still don't have answers to?
I flagged that all of the questions we had been responded to in this evening's meeting. But if there's a dispute about that, I'll do my best to address it. But I went one by one, and staff, when they came back with their additional information the second time, they did address all of the remaining ones that we had marked out. So I don't have any existing questions that haven't had a response. It's a judgment call on our parts whether it fully answered our question necessarily, but I'll check in with Yan Zhang. Are there outstanding questions that you're going to get additional information before the third reading discussion, or were we able to get all of those tonight?
Yeah, I think there's no additional questions unanswered, and we can provide any clarification report at third reading
Thank you very much.
if required. Yeah.
Okay, so that's it. We've completed the business of this evening's meeting. I'll accept adjournment. Accepted. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for your participation in this public hearing. Thank you to staff for all of your reports for our consideration this evening. Everybody have a fantastic evening. Good night.